Hello, everyone. Tonight we're going to begin with the oldest story the Greeks knew, how a world rose out of nothing. Before you get too comfortable, please like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always a quiet thrill to see these myths traveling across time zones. Now, turn off the lights, maybe switch on a fan for that soft, steady hum, and let's step into tonight's journey together. Back to the first breath of creation and the long night before names, we'll move slowly, like torchlight across an old wall, because these myths are less about answers than about the shapes of questions. What came first, and why anything came at all? The Greeks were not afraid to imagine silence, and from that silence, they taught us how to listen. In the beginning, there was no mountain to climb, no sea to cross, no wind to name. There was not even a sky to imagine those things against. There was only chaos, not the modern chaos of traffic and headlines, but a gape, a wide, patient opening where nothing had yet learned how to be. Chaos did not rage or soothe, it simply was, older than anger or laughter, older than any word for dark or light. It was the first emptiness, waiting for something to step forward and say, I am. From that, waiting rose the first presences, not gods with temples and hymns, but truths made vivid. Gaia unfolded, earth, broad-backed and patient, the floor on which every footfall would one day land. Tartarus settled, the abyss, the downward measure that makes up meaningful, and Eros kindled, desire, the quiet insistence that draws unlike things together and asks them to risk a future. These were not kings and queens. They were facts with heartbeat, the original grammar of existence. Night came next, clothed in her own shadow, Nyx, velvet and fathomless. With her came Erebus, the darkness that gathers where light cannot catch. They did not arrive with fanfare. They placed a hush over the newborn world, and in that hush they begot two children whose breath became the first rhythm any creature learns. Ether, the bright upper air the gods would someday breathe, and Hemera, day, the unveiling. From that a small family of shadow and shine began the turning of time. Stand beneath an open sky and watch the horizon pale, and it feels less like myth than memory. Imagine the first watchers on a stony headland, long before calendars, the way black thins into blue, blue into flame, flame into the bleached noon, where even insects hold their tongues. They would have felt Hemera arrive in their bones and Nyx return in their blood. In that cadence, culture begins, sleep and waking, planting and harvest. The small ceremonial courage of beginning again. Gaia, meanwhile, did not lie still. Earth is not only ground, she is appetite. She held within her the possibility of ridges and valleys, fields to be named, caves to be feared or blessed. Poets call her vast and unshaking, yet you can hear ambition inside that stillness. She wanted a roof for her breadth and a companion for her patience, the small hinge on which the next age will swing. Before roofs and companions, the cosmos learned its first customs. Chaos gave a distance, near and far, above and below. Tartarus warned that some doors do not open once entered. Eros moved among these thresholds like a whisper becoming a vow. Desire, not decree, starts things. Stones lean toward stones because they must, because something in them chooses union. Nyx's lineage thickened the night with personalities. From her walked beings later poets would name Hypnos sleep and Thanatos death, twin mercies that close eyes for a while and forever. Even Zeus, in his thunderous adulthood, would respect night with a caution he offered to few others, not because night triumphs, but because night endures. By day you may be king. By night you must be someone with a beating heart. That lesson is older than any temple and truer than any throne. Between night and day the world learned its manners. Ether laid a thin silver over the very high places. The breath of gods would one day be drawn there in the clear cold above a storms. Hemera walked the middle air, unrolling color for creatures not yet imagined. In the hollows, shadows pooled where future cities would grow, in groves, in gullies, in the mouths of caves where storytellers would later light fires and shape this very tale, proving that stories, like rivers, prefer to run in old beds. What's striking in this cosmogony is what it refuses to begin with. We do not start with a crowned face handing out offices. We start with a room being made and then furnished. Floor, cellar, breath, and lamp. The Greek world is a house before it is a throne room. You can almost see the light falling slant through a place not yet swept. In that house, the first codes emerge without being decreed. Night arrives, we rest. Day arrives, we work. The abyss exists. We mind our edge and speak softly near the stair. Listen a little closer and you hear a rehearsal in these first movements for nearly every tale that follows. The void sets a stage, the floor appears, the underfloor threatens, desire enters, light alternates with dark, custom forms. Later, when kings kneel or monsters roar or cities burn, the temperature of those events will still be governed by this early thermostat. Even the gods will be measured by how well they respect the rhythm, night and day established, and how gently they tread on the floor Gaia provided. It is tempting to ask already about the sky, the great blue lid that will soon arch over earth, and how he arrives. Hold that question at the edge of your tongue. This first chapter is about the moment before the arch, when a mother learns the shape of her need, when the house stands open to weather because no roof has yet been named. That openness is not lack, it is freedom. The room takes its first breath. Night and day begin their long game of chase around the walls, and the air keeps time. So the stage is set. We have a floor vast enough to carry oceans that have not yet learned to move. We have a cellar deeper than any courage that will be born in the age of men. We have a lamp that rises and a blanket that returns. We have a hunger that will eventually braid earth to sky. No one wears a crown yet, but everything holds a purpose, and purpose in myth is a stronger metal than gold. Next comes the ceiling, not yet, but is soon. For a heartbeat more, linger in the lit square of this first house, tasting the clean air ether has poured, watching the outlines of things sharpen under Hemera's hand, feeling the edges of the world ebb when Nyx lifts her palms. If you listen, you can hear Gaia settle her shoulders and look up. imagining the companion who will complete the room. He's coming. The story has already made a space for him, and when he arrives, the world will learn the feel of shelter. We will meet him in the next part. For now, remember how it began with a gap that did not panic, a floor that did not fail, a darkness that was not an enemy, and a desire that did not ask permission to begin. In the house, the cosmos has just learned to be. Gaia lifts her gaze and answers her own longing. She does not pray. She makes. From the breath of her body, she brings forth Uranus, the sky, a vast arch of a star-sown blue that bends to meet her edges. She also raises the mountains, ribs of a stone pushing up like the earth's careful exhalations, and calls Pontus from her eastern hem, the sea whose skin will one day mirror the moods of the heavens. With ceiling and ridges and waters set in their places, the room is complete, and what was only open space becomes a world with a roof, a spine, and a breathing shore. When Uranus leans down at dusk and dawn, pressing his starry chest to her green back, the world learns its first shape, domed and held. The poets are right to call them lovers, but they are also a physics. The sky's embrace pens the winds, keeps them from flying away into non-being. The earth's steadiness offers something strong enough to push against. Between them, room to grow. It is the first household, and already the air has learned to move softly in corridors between moss and cloud. From that union come children older than memory, yet named with care, the Titans, 12 in number, 6 sons and 6 daughters, each a current in the original river of beginnings. Among the sons, Oceanus, the encircling a stream whose waters fold the horizon into a ring. Coeus, the inquirer, whose thought moves like a north wind. Creus, a marker of boundaries where constellations hook their stories. Hyperion, lord of light, sire of sun and dawn. Iapetus, kin to mortals in both daring and wound. And Kronos, the youngest, whose patience is a blade waiting for a hand. Among the daughters, Theia, bright mother of radiance. Rhea, whose arms will cradle kings. Themis, law before tablets. Mnemosyne, memory that keeps the world from dissolving. Phoebe, the cool intelligence of night. And Tethys, nurse of rivers and rain. They stand like pillars in a raw temple, each a domain, each a promise. But Gaia's womb does not stop at symmetry. She bears other children, less polite to the eye and more honest to the world's roughness. The Cyclops, Brontes, Sterops, Arges, smiths with a single eye bright as a kiln at full roar, and the Hecatonchires, Cottus, Briareus, and Guys, 100-handed, 50-headed, forces of pressure and quake. They are not mistakes. They are capacities, thunder, lightning, impact, the heave of mountains, and the unthinkable reach of a storm. They walk like problems no ceiling can ignore. Uranus, gazing upon these new forms, fails the oldest test. He confuses a strangeness with threat. It is a flaw common to kings and to new fathers in the stories that survive. The fear that what does not mirror you will one day master you. He forces the Cyclops and the 100-handed down into Gaia herself, into caverns and compressions where no light can keep a promise. Imagine a continent trying to sleep with 3 volcanoes in its chest. Imagine a mother with her strongest children flattened inside her bones. Gaia groans. The sound runs through roots. Stones remember it. Pain is a teacher, and it is also an engineer. Gaia decides in a silence that has the weight of ritual. There are no forges yet, no bronze or iron. Those will come with the slow cleverness of men, but there is a stone. In a cave where drops count time, she fashions a sickle from flint, unyielding and serrated, a moon-shaped idea sharpened on patience. Tools have ancestors, and this is the ancestor of all decisive edges. She does not swing it herself. She calls her sons and tells them the truth. Your father has pressed the sky into cruelty. Your brothers are buried in me. Who among you will cut the world free? The older Titans study their feet. Oceanus is rivers and retreat. Hyperion is light, not cuts. Themis knows the cost of law. Only Kronos steps forward. There is courage here, and ambition braided through it, the kind of braid historians later pretend to comb straight. He takes the flint, cold and clean in his hand, and waits where Gaia teaches him to wait. Night arrives, Uranus descends, heavy with habit and sure of dominion. In the seam between sky and earth, Kronos rises and strikes. The blade bites. The cry that follows makes birds forget their roots for a heartbeat. The severing is not only an injury, it is a separation. The sky lifts away from the earth with a force that turns breath into weather. Blood falls. When that life scatters on the soil, beings spring up from the scarlet in the ground. The Erinyes, furies cloaked in the long memory of wrongs, who will haunt oath-breakers and kinslayers, the giants, high as battlements and full of grievance, and the Melia, ash-tree nymphs, kin to spear shafts and to the whispering shade that later shepherds will trust. The severed flesh, cast into the sea, throws up a foam, white as a lie told too quickly. From it, borne ashore near Cyprus, steps Aphrodite, desire given shape. The wind ruffles her hair as if to admit that the air itself has no defense. Pause here, and the story's frame shows in its studs. A frightened sovereign tries to bury power rather than befriend it. The earth absorbs more than she should. A child uses a tool older than metallurgy to cut open a future. Even the instrument matters. Flint is a Stone Age blade. It chips to an edge that breaks light. It does not bend. Before empires, there are hands learning to strike sparks and to cleave sinew. The myth remembers that under every later sword is a shard of a stone, patient and sharp. Kronos stands in the stunned quiet after the blow and tastes, for the first time, the dangerous sweetness of success. The ceiling no longer presses. Gaia's ribs can rise. The Titans stretch to their full heights. In the deeps, the monstrous brothers shift and know that someone has spoken for them at last. But victories born in shame-exact interest, Uranus, before withdrawing into the far cold beyond the stars, pronounces a truth that is both curse and law. As I was overthrown by my son, so shall he be overthrown by his. Prophecy in these stories is not a fortune cookie. It is the echo of physics through family. For now, the world changes. The arch of Uranus becomes distance rather than weight. Nights are cleaner, days have more room. The wind learns long paths. Stand where the mountains meet the sea, and you can feel the new geometry in your chest, a lightness between inhale and exhale that wasn't there when the ceiling pressed low. The earth, relieved, sends up grasses with a kind of gratitude. Rivers find their beds without gritting their teeth. The house built in our first chapter is furnished now with a pattern of mornings that arrive unbruised. But the cut remembers itself. The Furies are not merely women with wings and serpents. They are a system, the social physics of redress. When vows are violated, when kin murders kin, they rise, not always in talons, sometimes in insomnia, sometimes in verdicts that refuse to decay. The giants, too, are more than bigness. They are the uprush of the offended ground. Walls will be built in later ages to keep men safe from men. The giants are the wall's bad dreams, and the meliae hum in the groves where a spear timber grows, reminding the world that new branches can bear old grudges. As for Aphrodite, born from the sea's embarrassment and the sky's loss, she walks ashore already smiling at the trouble she is about to cause. Desire does not apologize for its origins. It enters the room and rearranges the chairs. The Greeks are honest enough to seat her early. Love comes from a wound, they say. It moves from shame to splendor without asking permission. Entire epics will hinge on whether a king bows to that splendor or tries to outlaw it. Neither approach will save him. Return, for a moment, to the exactness of the tool. In a world without smelters, a flint sickle is technology and right. The act, ambush, blow, severance, has the feeling of a forbidden ceremony, the first surgery performed on a household too intimate for witnesses. Shame hangs over the scene like a curtain, a sun rising from between mother and father, a weapon shaped like a moon, a cry that slashes the dark into strips. The silence after teaches people to speak in euphemisms. Later ages will call this a dethronement. The stone remembers it as a cut. With Uranus gone to the far vault and the Titans stood up in the new air, Kronos lifts the flint and names himself king. He will make of that title both cradle and trap. Gaia, for a moment, rests, the pressure gone. She breathes easier, and in that breathing, you can hear the ground begin to trust itself again. But any listener who has learned to read weather hears something else too, a faint ticking under the triumph, a prophecy trying the locks on a future door. For now, the lesson holds. Power that fears a strangeness will always choose burial over hospitality, and burial will rot the house from underneath. Power that answers cruelty with a clean cut may relieve the pressure, but it inherits the curse embedded in the cut, and the earth, who wants only to bear, will keep groaning until someone learns to hold wonder and terror without shoving either into a pit. We leave the scene with the stars bright on an unstressed sky, the sea reorganizing its glitter where white foam lately carried a goddess ashore, and the mountains a little higher for all the breathing they can do. The house is newly spacious, its ceiling lifted, its vents open, its closets full of consequences. A young king pockets a Stone Age blade and tells himself he has solved what he has only postponed. In the dark beneath the feet of the world, 3 brothers with 100 hands flex and wait, and the earth sleeps uneasily, Knowing what prophecies like to do when the lights go out, Kronos raises his head into the new space he has made and declares the world good. Perhaps he even believes it. The pressure is gone. The air is higher. The earth's ribs no longer creak. The titans step out from the hush like tall memories. And for a while, the room we have been building holds a gentler weather. Later poets will call this the Golden Age. And though the phrase glows too easily, there is a warmth about it, fields that ripen without being bullied, doors that do not need locks, mouths that do not learn the mathematics of famine. Time itself seems to soften, and that is fitting because Kronos is time of a certain kind, not the minute hand's march, but the broad, slow season that ripens fruit and then eats its own seed. If you lean in, you can hear the undertone. In the echo of Uranus's curse, there is a ticking beneath the harvest songs. Kronos wears kingship like a new cloak and feels the nap still rough against his throat. A cut made to free will always leave an edge. He knows the prophecy that has braided itself into his name. As he undid his father, so shall a son undo him. The Furies, born from the wound he opened, do not need to say a word. Their very existence is an underlined sentence. He marries Rhea, his sister, whose steadiness is the closest thing the Titans have to mourning, not dramatic, but decisive. She walks with the lawfulness of Themis and the memory of Mnemosyne braided into her, a woman made to hold a world together. They make a court out of clear air and mountaintops. They move among rivers as if the water were already practice for the future. The Golden Age belongs to both of them, to the caution of a king who has learned what cuts can do, and to the shaping patience of a queen who wants the house not just free of pressure, but full of children. The first child comes, Hestia, and the prophecy steps forward from the corner of the room and speaks to Kronos in his sleep. He wakes, the jaw like a locked door. Kingship, he tells himself, is an art of prevention. In that sentence, he swallows his daughter whole. It is a terrible verb, but the myth insists on it, because the point is not nutrition, but negation. Hestia, born to be hearth and center, becomes a silence inside the father who should have been her shelter. Demeter follows, then Hera, then Hades, then Poseidon. Each time Rhea feels the bright, shaking a strength of a newborn dwindle into the stillness of a body taken away. And each time Kronos feels a small, momentary peace, like a man blotting out a line on a list and refusing to see how the paper thins under his pen. He tells himself he is obeying a law older than pity: protect the throne, keep the ceiling steady, do not let the future arrive. In the fields, crops keep their promises and the wind minds its manners, but in the palace, the air grows hard to breathe. Rhea is not memory and law for nothing. She's patient, but she's not furniture. By the fifth grief, her hands shake less from sorrow than from decision. She goes to Gaia for counsel, because mothers speak to mothers across any number of centuries, and the earth remembers how to make a plan. In some tellings, Uranus, withdrawn into his cold arch, lowers a thought like weather too. Either way, the advice has the cleanliness of a good tool. Leave, hide, and when the hour comes, trade stone for skin. When the sixth child stirs in her, Rhea moves. She travels east and south and then to the island that leans into the Aegean, like a bull lowered to charge. Crete is old even when myths are young. There are caves there that hold night, in a way no torch can defeat, and shrines where women have sung for so long, the stone has learned the tune. Rhea chooses Mount Ida, a place where the mountain's shoulder opens into a throat of limestone, and there, held by nymphs and rock, she gives birth to Zeus. Everything about him arrives with a kind of clarity. The cry that starts in his chest sounds like the opening of a storm. His eyes hold a brightness that looks like decision. Rhea looks once into that brightness and knows that she will not be able to teach Kronos mercy. She will have to teach him error. She wraps a rock in swaddling and gathers the cloth around it with the hands of a woman who knows how to lie to save a life. When she returns to the court, she lifts the bundle with all the ritual tenderness a house like this requires. Kronos does not look closely. Fear breeds haste. The stone enters the darkness where his children are, and for a moment the world believes it has practiced safety again. The real child lies in a cave where the roof sweats. The curettes take up their posts at the mouth, armored dancers whose job is noise. They clash bronze on bronze, step heavy, shout, make clamor with a kind of choreography so that any chance echo of infant thunder will die under the drum. There is a hunger in caves that eats sound and returns it to the world changed. The curettes keep that hunger so busy it cannot learn the shape of a baby's breath. Crete has always known how to hide a god. Amalthea nurses the child, a goat whose patience has made her the equal of any nurse in any palace. From her milk he fattens. From her warm flank he learns the curriculum of warmth. From the curve of her horns he learns a first lesson in power that bends rather than breaks. Later, when accident or omen snaps one of those horns, it will become the cornucopia, a myth of plenty poured from pain, an emblem that tells kitchens for centuries that abundance is not an argument. It is a kindness that can be taught. There are stories that say Zeus lifts Amalthea to the stars when she dies, a thin milk-white arc across dark that shepherds will use for centuries to steer by. Even gods keep the names of their first teachers. He does not grow slowly. Myth is allowed to be unfair. He learns at the pace of weather. One day, a squall that topples a fisher's hut. Soon after, a wind with a long memory that knows how to bend whole forests. He learns silence too, because caves require it. A boy taught to breathe quietly learns other useful disciplines: how to hide, how to listen, how to wait until a door opens by itself, how to choose a moment not just because it is possible, but because it is right. In the little courts beyond the island where Kronos throws feasts to praise his own success at outwitting prophecy, a rumor begins to move the way moths do, silent everywhere, begging for flame. Rhea visits when she can, in disguises that would fool even a mother's gossip. She brings oils and linens. She brings gossip of the court turned soft enough to be a lullaby. She brings a story more important than any other, that the world is not made only of fear. In the doorway, the curettes stamp and ring. Their helmets catch the torchlight and throw it back as if even their clamor wants to be a star. Back in the palace, the swallowed children do not die. The myth is insistent on this. Another lesson about negation versus destruction. There is a way of getting rid of that is only postponement disguised as power. Inside Kronos, they are alive, not as fists against a ribcage, but as presences that refuse to vanish. Hearth, harvest, queenship, the underworld, the sea, each of those domains is present in the monarch's own belly, like ideas that will not stop their slow education. He sits on his throne and feels a nausea that no herb can settle because he has mistaken digestion for governance. If the golden age endures for as long as it does, it is because ordinary people keep it alive. They build without dread. They plant without naming a harvest god every third breath. They sleep with doors unbarred. It matters that the story remembers this. Kings do not make ages golden, work and weather do. But ages are also the shadows cast by their rulers' fears. You can feel the light dim at the edges when Kronos walks past a window. He is teaching his world to look small. A world taught to look small forgets to make sons brave. Zeus grows into a young man with the cave still in him, the patience, the listening, the habit of choosing the right moment over the loud one. He learns from nymphs who do not care about titles, from mountain goats whose balance is a sermon, from winds that curl through stone corridors and leave meanings behind. Rhea watches the way he watches, and there's a steadiness in her jaw that was not there on the day she practiced the lie. The hour is coming, and it will not be a clean hour. Myths do not promise that. They promise proportion. The golden age, if we keep the phrase, ends not with famine or invasion, but with an idea maturing in a cave, that fear cannot eat the future forever and call it safety. The tick under the harvest songs is louder now, but so is another sound, the ring of bronze on bronze, the laughter of a boy who already understands storms, the quiet breath of a queen who has learned to turn grief into timing. Kronos sits with a stone in him and tells himself it is a proof. He has swallowed his evidence. He does not notice that evidence is heavier than children, and that some lies lodge at angles that make a man sit crooked on his throne. What comes next will change where the sky keeps its thunder and who is allowed to name the seasons. But tonight, hold the picture of a cave with milk on the floor, a goat with a bright eye, a circle of dancers whose whole job is to make a racket, and a mother who has traded stone for skin. The gods are not yet gods as we know them. They are still feelings with hands, but hands, if they are taught well, can open a mouth and say enough. When Zeus had learned patience from a stone and milk and the measured racket of bronze on bronze, the cave at Ida no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like a sheath. A blade does not live in its scabbard forever. The day he stepped out, the mountain wind spoke his name the way pine speaks to thunder, soft first, then absolutely. He went not to a battlefield, but to council, because the first weapon he would wield was not lightning. It was mind. Medes met him at a stream that braided cold over dark pebbles, the kind of water that makes a mouth tell the truth. She was wisdom, with ankles muddy from walking in real places, a Titaness whose shrewdness belonged to the future. Strength is loud, she said, but cunning sets the table. The plan they cut between them had the clean edges of a good blade. To unmake a swallowing, make the swallowed world rise. He returned to Kronos disguised among servants and singers and men who pour wine with their eyes lowered. In palaces, invisibility is a craft, and he practiced it well. Metis had taught him to mix a draught that did not taste of vengeance, but would make the body remember what it had hidden. Some say it was honey-laced wine cut with a bitter that woke the gut. Others, that it was a crumble of mustards and herbs remembered from mountain goats' clever eating. Call it medicine for a sickness the patient refused to name. When Kronos reached for the cup, he did not look into the eyes of the hand that offered it. Fear breeds haste, haste begets ruin. The king drank. The hall held its breath. First a shiver in the belly, then a groan, then a convulsion that doubled the father of Titans over his own throne. From him came Hestia, not infant, but full-robed fire walking on her own feet. Then Demeter, a scent of grain and rain moving with her. Then Hera, whose gaze arrived sharp enough to cut fabric. Then Hades, whose presence made torches think about their limits. And at last Poseidon, with sea in his shoulder and tide in his jaw. They stood not as rescued children, but as gods sprung into their stature in a single breath. Kronos wiped his mouth and saw his fear take bodies. The room had changed kingdoms while he was busy reassuring himself that a lie was safety. There was no parley. The prophecy that had hung like iron air over every feast in that house drew breath and sounded like a trumpet. The Titans ran to their high place, Mount Othrys, a long, dark-backed mountain in the south, old as a warning, while Zeus led his siblings north to a younger summit, whose face still showed the weather's careful finger marks. Mount Olympus would take its name from what they made of it, but for now it was merely height and clean wind and the space a storm prefers. Two thrones grew like opposing weather systems across the spine of Greece. Othrys, with its age and deep memory of a stone, Olympus, with its bright promise, raw, impatient, and tuned to a future that had not yet learned to fail. 10 years of war is an easy phrase to say and a hard season to live. The Titanomachy did not unspool in one red ribbon. It came in a stuttering seasons, surges, and retreats, weeks that felt like a stalemate while the world learned what kind of noise it could survive. When the Titans marched, the light bent around their shoulders. Hyperion pushed dawn and noon like shields. Coeus sent inquiry like a cold wind through every plan. Iapetus's daring cut and cut again, as if catastrophe were a sport. Oceanus held apart, too ring-like and old to choose shore over shore, and Tethys lifted rivers to nurse those who bled on both sides. Kronos fought like a clock that refuses to admit rust. On Olympus, the air learned new arts. Zeus's arm taught clouds how to listen. Hera stood beside him, her anger organized into law. Demeter sent barley to green again in trampled places, because armies do not live on rage, they live on bread. Hestia built hearths in caves and on ledges, and men and lesser gods warmed their hands and remembered why they had started. Hades learned the logistics of shadow. His horses pulled night where it was needed. Poseidon struck his trident into dry gullies, and water rose with a roar that owed nothing to mercy. When they moved together, storm, grain, hearth, underworld, sea, the world felt for a moment like a machine built by feeling instead of iron. For years, the war hung at a fixed point, neither side able to lift its future over the other's shoulders. Gaia, who had suffered when Uranus forced her monstrous sons into her depths, watched men and gods chip at her ridges and bleed on her shelves. The groan she had given when she was young returned softer and more determined. She whispered again to Zeus in a dream that felt like memory. "If you would win," said the earth to the storm, "you must go where your father feared to look. There are hands in the darkness that can hold a mountain. There is a forge in the deep that can make you a voice." So Zeus descended. Not alone, down into the gates of Tartarus he went with the brothers who had just been vomited back into the day, and with sisters whose steadiness would keep any torch from forgetting its job. Tartarus is not just a place, it is a decline felt in the bones, the way a cave persuades your breath to become careful. There, behind doors that had not been opened since shame shut them, the Cyclops hammered time without heat, and the 100-handed lay bound like earthquakes put to bed, and promised a story if they would only be quiet. The locks came off. Light walked in patterns those eyes had not seen. The Cyclops, grateful in the direct way of makers, asked for nothing but an anvil's song and the chance to pay a debt older than language. For Zeus, they forged a bolt that carries not only fire but verdict, a spear of weather that knows whom to judge. For Poseidon, there were 3 prongs for one will, a trident that tastes depths and answers a stubborn land with the grammar of flood. For Hades, they shaped a helm that teaches sight to look the other way, a darkness so complete it becomes a road rather than a wall. When the 100-handed rose, the cave learned the word leverage. Codus, Briareus, and guys flexed, and the feathers that had kept them in Myth's basement fell like old arguments. They climbed, and the world above them took notice. Mountains shifted their weight uneasily, forests leaned. On Othrys, the Titans felt the old order tremble under its own age. On Olympus, the young gods stood straighter, as if an invisible brace had been cinched behind their shoulder blades. When the battle opened again, it did not feel like the continuation of a quarrel. It felt like the first day a river realizes it is more than melted snow. Zeus threw. The sky did not just brighten, it decided. Bolts split the air like laws. Poseidon drove the sea inland till cliffs remembered that they were former seabeds and shivered. Hades, unseen, moved where he chose, and enemies found that their strength had misplaced its witnesses. The 100-handed uprooted hills and cast them in handfuls at the old kings. Imagine a storm that throws mountains the way a shepherd throws stones at crows. On Othrys, the Titans braced and bellowed, but feeling had learned engineering, and age met a mathematics it could not unlearn. Kronos fought to the last like a man furious not at defeat, but at the idea that time might have other purposes than custody. When he fell, It was not to a single blow, but to the accretion of decisions made by a generation he had tried to swallow. That is how most tyrannies end, not with the sky cracking in two, but with 100 right choices made in a sequence until the old scaffolding sighs and lets go. Victory does not crown itself. It has to be told what to do. Zeus did not slay the Titans wholesale. Death would have been too easy, too quick an end for a lesson that needed to last. He sent them down, as his father had sent others down, to the cellars beneath the world, all but those who had stood apart or stood with him. Oceanus kept his ring and his rivers. Themis, who had always known which way the balance tilted, took her seat beside the new throne. Prometheus and Epimetheus, who had wagered on the future and on the human habit of learning, were spared the bronze doors. For the rest, Tartarus received them, and the 100-handed became jailers whose patience reached across centuries like a bridge. Bronze gates rose, whose hinges would not rust even when the stories that named them did. There is a chill in any a story when it begins to rhyme with itself. Uranus buried what he feared and was cut for it. Kronos swallowed what he feared and was emptied for it. Zeus bound what he feared and crowned law upon it. He did not call his fear safety, he called it memory. He stood at the lip of the pit and understood that power must be fenced not only by strength but by oath. So he swore, as did his house, by the Styx, the hateful river whose black coil runs even through heavens. If a god is rash enough to lie, oaths would hold where blades could only puncture. On Olympus, the wind changed temperature. Not a gale, not a storm, a slow warming, as if the air itself had decided to be hospitable. Fires were built that were not campfires but hearths. The young court tasted a quiet that did not taste like delay. For the first time since chaos opened its patient mouth, there was rule with a future that did not feel like a trap. The world had been arranged into 3 emblems in the crucible of war: storm for the sky, sea for the restless edges, shadow for limits, and law. They would be distributed with fairness soon enough. But that is the next tale. For now, picture Othrys smoke-soft in the distance. It is stones remembering what it is to be thrown. Tartarus shut, the Cyclopes wiping their hands on aprons hot with accomplishment, the 100-handed leaning on spears the size of shipmasts and not bored. On the young mountain, a family stands looking in 3 directions at once: upward at weather still humming, outward at oceans stung into respect. Downward at doors they will keep shut. Zeus closes his fist around a bolt that glows without consuming itself. Kingship is not a cloak any longer. It is a harness. Tomorrow they will cast lots, and the world will learn how to share itself. Tonight, the thunder finally sounds less like rage and more like order. Morning after a decade of thunder is always a stranger than the storm. The smoke clears, the mountains stop listening for the next blow, and what remains is a silence busy with decisions. Zeus stood in that silence with his brothers and sisters and did the simplest wise thing a victor can do. He refused to keep everything. Rule must be divided or it rots. So the 3 sons of Kronos, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, did not haggle like merchants or test each other's strength again. They cast lots. Fate had already written her signature on this family. Now they let chance move her pen. The bones fell, and the world arranged itself. To Zeus came the sky, the high, cold province of cloud and lightning, and the thin, bright air the gods prefer. To Poseidon fell the sea, a kingdom of restlessness and weight. All rivers gathered into one long thought that never ends. To Hades went the underworld, the land beneath living feet where shades drift and oaths grow teeth. Earth itself, gay as back and shoulders, none would own alone. She was held in common, a floor that even kings must share. It sounds tidy when told quickly. In truth, it felt like a tide turning through a family. Poseidon accepted the oceans with a grim nod, as if salt had always been his tongue. He knew already how cliffs answer a trident and how horses take fright at thunder. Hades did not object to the dark allotment, though many would later pretend it was a lesser prize. He understood something the proud seldom do, that treasure hides where light does not. They would call him Pluton, the wealthy one, not because he hoarded, but because every vein of gold and iron and silence runs through his halls. And Zeus, whose arm could cast verdict like a spear, lifted his gaze and felt at last a ceiling answer him. A court needs a house. The gods chose a mountain that had waited all this while with its shoulders in cloud, Olympus. It was not merely tall, it was a threshold, stone crossing into sky, snow into sunlight, wind into a thin, clarifying music. The air itself marked the boundary. No walls, no gates. The altitude did the work. Here storms broke, but did not linger. Here torchlight looked like a new mineral discovered in daylight. Later poets will drape it in marble and gold and talk about colonnades. Tonight it is simpler, a set of halls with the sky for a roof and cloud for curtains, a place so high that decay forgets the path. Zeus took his seat, and for the first time the thunderbolt felt less like a weapon than a scepter. His rule did not lean only on a strength. He had the memory of war, the counsel of Theseus near his ear, and the habit of making oaths that bound even himself. When he spoke, the sound had the weather of verdicts, firm, not frantic. The eagle stooped and settled as if it had always been waiting for that wrist. In the stillness after victory, he did what new rulers rarely do. He kept the old warnings in view. The curse that had chased his father still paced the room. So Zeus built a reign that sheltered more than it frightened. Beside him stood Hera, not merely consort, never merely that, but queen in a way that did not need crown or proclamation. Hera is marriage when the feast is over and the vows must be kept amid noise and bruised feelings in winter. She is childbirth's risk and triumph. She is the ledger of promises, terribly patient, terribly exact. The poets will call her jealous, and they are not wrong. Betrayal is the pressure that reveals the form of her wrath. But here, at the founding of the court, her presence does a quieter work. She makes an order out of love that is more binding than fear. When a god swore in her hearing, the sound was a nail. Demeter walked the new halls like a field that had learned to stand upright. Grain came with her as scent and as memory. On her shoulder, the months perched like small birds. She smiled less than the others and listened more. While kings divided emblems, she thought about kitchens, and about the hands that would ladle autumn into bowls. The first farmers to touch plow to soil in that age did not know her face, but they knew her footsteps. Under her gaze, seeds remembered what they were for. In her silence, you can already hear the hinge creak that will open the seasons. And Hestia, firstborn and last freed, took no throne at all. She asked for the center. She set her fire there and kept it. If Olympus is a house, Hestia is the reason that house has a heart. If the gods are a family, she is the square of warmth where even warring siblings fall enough to speak. She wanted no scandal, built no temples for herself with columns tall as pride. Instead, every home kept a place for her, a clay circle, a flamed stone, a quiet, in palaces and farmsteads alike. Before bread and after it, someone tipped wine to Hestia, because without a tended flame, rule becomes performance and law becomes weather. She adjusted the coals and made Olympus livable. Below, the realms accepted their rulers in the languages they understood. Poseidon descended, and the sea rose to meet him, a green animal uncoiling. He built a palace under waves, coral ribbed and roofed with shell, and yoked creatures old as night to his chariot. He did not sit easily. He is a god of moods. His realm is never still. When he laughed, islands felt their moorings tug. When he frowned, beaches moved farther inland and did not come back for a generation. Sailors would learn to read his face in a horizon, offering him the first fish and the swearing impossible sobriety in exchange for a harbor. Hades went the other way. The doors he keeps are not iron alone. They are customs and boundaries and the relief of certainty after the raw edge of grief. Cerberus lay at his feet, 3 heads learning the exact extent of mercy. Judges took their stools, Minos with a lawmaker's chin, Rhadamanthus with a farmer's fairness, Achilles with hands still clean from tending an island. Most souls would drift in asphodel, neither punished nor praised, a gray broad field where memory thins until sorrow cannot bruise. A rarer few earned Elysium. Very few deserve Tartarus. Hades did not gloat when he sent them there. He attended to his work like a surgeon who closes the last stitch, wipes his tools, and says nothing because nothing is required. He is the god who does not need your love to do his job. Back on the mountain, the court took on weight, not mass, but meaning. Courtyards learned how to receive disputes. Clouds learned how to behave like curtains, drawing themselves back when council convened. The young gods, with their thunder-smoothed tempers and rain-washed faces, began to discover the difference between conquest and rule. The former is bright and brief. The latter is repetition transformed into ritual. Zeus made it a custom that the gods swear by the Styx, because only a hateful river is corrosive enough to burn lies off the tongue of a being who thinks himself above truth. If a god swore falsely by that water, he did not stride off with a laugh. He fell, voiceless and breathless, until the penalty was paid. Olympus learned consequences and kept them polished. The world felt the change. In valleys, people woke to mornings that arrived like promises kept. On capes, fishermen learned how to read whether Poseidon was in a humor for small boats. In city squares that did not yet have names, mothers touched the warm centers of their hearts and remembered Hestia before they remembered themselves. In fields, plowmen lifted a pinch of soil and crumbled it between finger and thumb, feeling Demeter's decision in the way it held together. A priest in some little town no one will ever sing about carried a cup carefully up a hill because the wind had that listening feeling Zeus brings when law is about to be spoken aloud. Mount Olympus itself learned a courtesy. Snow had the decency to stay ornamental at the summit while leaving the paths clear for feet that needed to pass. Eagles rose without scary theatrics when ambassadors arrived. Even the rain discovered that it could fall as blessing and not only as consequence. The mountain was not heaven. It was a good house. All this might sound inevitable in hindsight. It was not. Every division born of lots is a decision born of will. Zeus could have claimed all three realms and dared his brothers to object. Poseidon could have broken the mountain with a wave. Hades could have reminded both that every victory ends in his book. They did none of that. They ate together instead. Hera counted their oaths. Hestia fed their anger back into flame the way a good cook turns scraps into supper. Demeter walked the lower slopes and taught thyme and barley where to stand. From those simple obediences springs the order that will anchor every later quarrel. There will be quarrels. A court as bright as this throws shadows, and the gods will fill them with all the old human hungers at a scale mortals can hardly imagine. But for a breath, attend to the feat that is not a battle. 3 brothers who survived their father's stomach, managing not to make a second war out of apportionment. 3 sisters, each with a different tenderness, making the high house habitable. The world is safer when the hearth is tended. The grain is promised, the vow is heard, and the thunder belongs to someone who remembers the cave. Tomorrow, new faces will take their places in these halls. Wisdom in bronze, twins of light and shadow, a smith limping toward wonder. A god who moves faster than border stones can be set down, but tonight, Olympus has a roof of a sky and a floor of cloud, and the kind of quiet you only hear when authority has finally learned to sit down at its own table. Olympus had a roof now and a center flame, but a house is only a house until voices begin to fill it. They came like weather fronts, clear, cold, radiant, loud, and each arrival altered the temperature of the halls. The first of the new presences did not walk through the doorway at all. She arrived the way a solved problem does, sudden, inevitable, already armored. Zeus had long before taken Metis into himself, swallowing wisdom to keep a whispered fate from taking shape. But wisdom is not a trinket you can pocket. When the pressure within him grew into agony, a blow split his brow, some say by Hephaestus's hammer, others by Prometheus's wedge, and from that bright fracture sprang Athena. No wailing, no confusion, bronze on her shoulders, a spear like a line of thought, eyes the exact color of a decision. She is not just intelligence, she is a strategy waking up in the body. The moment a city chooses a wall instead of a boast, she walked the porticos as if she had always known where each column wanted to stand. When war came to her, It straightened its back and cleaned its boots. When craft came, it sharpened its chisel and measured twice. She took no lover, asked no favor, and set her chair beside Zeus, not like a daughter begging treats, but like a counselor who refuses to flatter. In Athens, a far hill would one day blaze with her name, and the city would carry her emblem, owl-eyed, olive-crowned, across coins and centuries. Here, at the beginning, she did a quieter thing. She taught the court to count consequences before thunder. Where Athena is noon, Apollo is afternoon light slanting through dust, making everything look meaningful. His mother, Leto, had wandered the world with her shame and pride, turned away by lands fearful of Hera's anger until the floating rock of Delos offered her a place to kneel. There she bore the twins, first Artemis, then Apollo, and the island set roots in gratitude. Apollo grew golden without being soft. He tuned a lyre, and men forgot their knives. He drew a bow, and kings remembered their manners. He is prophecy given a human face, speaking through a woman on a tripod at Delphi, his phrases smoke-coiled and double-edged. Ask him whether to cross a river, and he will tell you, quite truthfully, that a great empire will fall. Which empire is a matter for your conscience. He heals, he harms, he sends plague in bright arrows and music that undoes a stubbornness. When his festivals rise, the Pythian games, you can hear discipline drummed into joy, athletes straining where oracles murmur. The gods' two halves agreeing that beauty requires rules. Artemis, his sister, lives where rules thin and the wild takes over. She is the moon when it refuses to flirt, silver and remote, a goddess who keeps her body her own and protects the bodies of those who want the same. She moves through forests like a rumor you wish were true. Deer follow, not tamely, but without fear. Girls pray to her when they are still girls and thank her when their hips begin to bear the future. She does not relish blood, but she is not sentimental. When a man boasts he is the better hunter, she improves his education. When sailors offend her, she asks a price no father wants to pay. And wind returns only when the knife is honest. Under her eye, the night is not safe, but it isn't lawless either. It belongs to those who listen. If Apollo and Artemis are light arranged and light withheld, Ares is the moment light breaks on a blade. He does not arrive with the speeches. He arrives with noise, the iron-sweet smell before a charge, the shriek of joy some men hate themselves for loving. He is war without a cause, courage without a map. Even those who honor him do so warily. Victory that tastes only of blood sours quickly on the tongue. He is often beaten not by stronger men, but by those who think before they throw. The other gods tolerate him the way a household tolerates a stormy sun, useful in his hour, insufferable at supper. Across the forge from him stands Hephaestus, a god who limps and makes the limp look like part of the dance. Whether hurled from Olympus by Zeus in a rage or born already marked by Hera's pride, he fell once and learned the geometry of pain. At his anvils the world is persuaded into usefulness, shields that hold stories in their round, bracelets the size of a promise, palaces that hum. He teaches that fire can be made to work for you if you accept its terms, and that ugliness is often just the beginning of shape. He marries Aphrodite by arrangement, an iron worker given the evening a star. The match is less marriage than metaphor, and the household knows it. But we will come to her in a moment. First Hermes, who never arrives when you expect him, because expectation is his favorite door to slip past. Son of Zeus and Maya, he learns to walk and steals on the same day. He hides Apollo's cattle by making them walk backward, strums a tune on a turtle shell to distract the angry, and talks himself out of punishments before the sentence is even finished. He wears wings where other men wear obligations. Borders are lines to him, and lines are invitations. From Olympus to mortal roads, from living to dead and back again, he moves easily, a courier of messages and the patron saint of getting away with it. In time, merchants and thieves, often the same men, will pray to him, and travelers will scratch his name into milestones as if to say, "Let me cross and not be noticed." In council, he is indispensable. When gods sulk in corners, he fetches them out with a joke that sounds like a knife being sheathed. Now Aphrodite, who does not enter rooms so much as rooms learn they were empty without her. Born from a sea foam, caught on a wound the sky received long ago, she steps ashore already dangerous and already forgiven. Beauty, in these stories, is not merely a face, it is a gravitational field. Men pivot, women calculate, kings forget to be prudent. She marries Hephaestus and keeps company with Ares. She promises fishermen their nets will be heavy, and mothers their daughters will not be invisible. She is the answer to prayers people are ashamed to speak aloud. The trouble she causes is not petty. Empires bend at her ankles. No thunderbolt can command desire. Even Zeus learns that. When she smiles, cities plan gates wide enough to welcome catastrophe. These are gods who could have made Olympus into a bright quarrel and nothing more. What prevents that fate is not Zeus's bolt, but the court's willingness to ritualize its arguments, to appoint days for them, songs for them, rules for their danger. That is where the festivals matter. Walk with me for a breath into Athens when the Panathenaea lifts its long procession. Girls in saffron carry a woven robe for their patroness. Wrestlers oiled and dusted test each other under the public's clean stare. Elders lift their cups at the right line of an old hymn. This is not distraction, it is instruction. A city practicing reverence until reverence becomes muscle memory. Or go to Delphi when the Pythian games flare every 4 years in Apollo's honor. The laurel bites the winner's brow. The singers pour riddles into the theater's bowl of air. The priestess descends and rises, her breath a politics older than kings. The god of measure and music is celebrated by men who know that excellence is a form of devotion. Even the vendors on the road learn to speak softly when the tripod hums. The lost to enter, last because he is always late and somehow right on time, is Dionysus. He is the ripeness of grapes and the moment a mask becomes a face, the strange mercy of madness and the way a crowd can forget itself without becoming a mob. Twice born, the older stories say, once of Semele's body burned by seeing too much God at once, and once of Zeus's thigh where the unborn child was sewn for safekeeping. He arrives with a retinue of creatures who do not need permission to dance, satyrs with their goat knees and tilted laughter. Maenads with hair like weather, drums that teach the earth to answer. He brings not only wine, but the idea that the mind can be taken off its leash and returned unhurt. Wiser because it remembers what it could have done. He is not tame, he frees and he punishes, sometimes in the same breath. Mock him, and he will make a king see leaf and fur where his palace should be. Honor him, and the vineyard will forgive late frost. Crucially, Dionysus is the patron of theater. In the city, during the Dionysia, citizens sit shoulder to shoulder, war widow beside fishmonger, magistrate beside mason, and watch their worst fears made beautiful on a stage. Masks amplify, choruses warn. Heroes fail. The god demands that a community look at itself until it understands what mercy costs. You can call that religion or medicine. In Athens, they called it both, with Dionysus at the threshold. Something changes in the way Olympus touches the world. The old order, the bright, straight line from throne to decree, learns to loop. Mysteries blossom in the underbrush of official worship. Quiet rites at Eleusis, where Demeter's grief and Persephone's return are enacted with torches and silence, promising that death and life are not enemies but partners. Orphic whispers that a god once torn can be reassembled and that a soul might choose its fate with better information next time. The public sacrifices continue, smoke curling from altars, boys steadying the bowl, priests reading futures in livers slick as sunsets. But now there are also nights when citizens walk to the city's edge with lanterns cupped against the wind and ask questions no herald could phrase. This is the genius of the Olympian household at its best. It makes room for owl-eyed counsel and moonlit solitude, for hammer and hymn, for marriage kept and desire unanswerable, for rules that hold and ecstasies that renew the reasons for rules. The gods are not perfect. They are mirrors held at angles that let mortals see themselves, disciplined, distracted, jealous, generous, clever, foolish, brave. In their feasts and feuds, a culture practices what it wants to be. And in the high house, the hearth burns evenly. Hestia keeps the center warm while storms practice outdoors. Athena's shadow falls across law tables. Hermes hums in corridors, carrying messages that might avert a war. Hephaestus's fire beats time in the workshops. A laurel-scented breeze from Delphi slides in and clarifies a debate. A ribbon of laughter and drums from a hillside vineyard reminds the council that joy is not a vice. Olympus becomes not a museum of power, but a living city of tendencies, each one dangerous if left alone, each one indispensable when set beside its opposite. The house breathes, so do the people below, and the story, suddenly, has dozens of doors to choose from. Long before cities learned to lift marble into sky, and long before kings hired poets to tidy their reputations, the earth was green and busy without us. Olympus had arranged itself. The rivers had chosen their beds. The winds knew their doors. What the world lacked were hands to work its patience and voices to answer its evenings. It was Prometheus who thought of us, a Titan who stood with Zeus in the war, not out of love but out of foresight. His very name means forethought. He watched the gods settle into their chairs and saw a silence still empty at the table, where Epimetheus, His brother was fond of gifts given too late. Prometheus liked plans with hinges that clicked. Some say he shaped us beside a river bank, kneeling where mud keeps secrets and coaxing limbs and faces from the clay. Others say Athena breathed into those new shapes, a thin, bright breath that taught us pines how to stand. However it happened, the first people rose cold and soft-skinned into a world of tooth and weather. We were slow where deer were quick, furless where winter is an honest judge, thin-fingered where the ground is heavy. Prometheus watched us shiver and huddle under caves, where bears had recently taught us what not to do. He asked Zeus for a spark to teach us how to live and was refused. There had already been a slight between them. At Mycone, men would one day call it Sicyon. Prometheus presided over the first division of sacrifice, the ritual that decides what part gods will take and what part mortals may share. He wrapped bones in shining fat, a clever deceit, and hid the best meat beneath an unlovely heap. Zeus chose the gleam and found himself chewing disappointments. Etiquette was established in that moment: smoke for the gods, cooked flesh for those who cook. But kings do not enjoy being taught by tricks. In answer, Zeus took fire from men. Night thickened. Prometheus refused the new order. He climbed where the air thins to a forge the Cyclopes had kept hot since before weather had a name. He stole flame, not in his hands, but in a hollow fennel stalk, the kind that carries seed and will carry a coal well, a plant that grows where roads forget themselves and fields begin. He walked it down through winds that would have told on a less determined thief and gave it to mortals. For the first time, darkness had competition. Sparks learned how to find each other in dry grass. Smoke rose like a composition. With fire came what fire always brings when shepherded well: cooked meat that saves teeth and time, hardened points on spears, light for longer talk, the idea that night can be negotiated with. Zeus discovered the theft and did not shout. He answered with a gift that would school the whole species. He commanded the gods to make her, Hephaestus shaping her from clay as delicately as if he were repairing a favorite cup. Athena dressing her, fitting mind with skill, Aphrodite giving her a gravity the room could not ignore, Hermes adding nimble speech that smiles even when it lies. She was called Pandora, all gifted, because the Olympians had crowded her with their best intentions. Into her keeping was placed a great jar, a pithos sealed against curiosity. Later tellers would turn it into a box. The shape matters less than the warning. Prometheus had told his brother never to accept a gift from Zeus. Forethought always suspects envelopes bearing seals. But Epimetheus, afterthought, welcomed Pandora, warming to her the way any lonely house warms to company. It is the small domestic hours that undo us. One day, whether by accident or by Hermes' suggestion, murmured like wind under a door. She opened the jar, outpoured the things that mark our age, disease that does not confess its reasons, toil that makes backs into maps of time, grief that picks its hours without knocking, envy that burns without warming, madness whose arguments are persuasive, and finally, death. Quietest of them all, they did not conquer the world in one afternoon. They simply fanned out and moved in, Only hope remained inside the jar. Some say trapped. Others say tucked away, for when we would need it most. The Greeks are honest about hope. It is comfort and it is bait. It keeps us walking and sometimes it keeps us waiting. Prometheus paid in chains. Zeus had him carried to the far edge of the world, Caucasus in most tellings, though any high hard range will do where the wind can get a purchase. There the smith god fixed him to rock with bonds that do not rust. Every morning an eagle came down, ancient and industrious, and ate the liver of the Titan who could not die. Every night the organ grew back, because forethought knows how to endure, and every dawn the labor began again. We sometimes treat this as the price of a particular theft. It is also an allegory of knowledge and pain. Those who bring fire learn that the bill is paid in small, repeating coins. He did not repent. He had a secret heavier than iron, a piece of information even Zeus, so thick with counsel and gaze, did not possess. The king feared a doom, like his father's, overthrow from his own line, and Prometheus knew the mother whose child would put the crown in danger. In some versions, it was Thetis, a sea nymph whose son would be greater than his father. In others, it is left unnamed, the story savoring the taste of our not knowing. Zeus sent Hermes to demand the answer. The messenger found chains and pride and a mouth that would not sell the world to save a rib cage. Time, which Kronos once pretended to own, did what it always does. It complicated loyalties. While Prometheus counted eagles, men below learned to count other things: seasons with their hearths, stars with their ships, fairness against hunger. They learned sacrifice done with respect, the smell of fat on altars rising into air that had once refused to be warm. They learned to bake clay into cups that did not leak, and to hammer bronze into edges that did not shatter. If Zeus grudged this at first, his grudging became habit and then custom. Even kings are improved by the petitions they cannot stop. The story folds back on itself in time, as Greek stories like to do. A hero will one day pass that mountain, born of Zeus, but bound to mortal sorrow, and will draw his bow in the high blue air. An arrow will strike the eagle and end its appointment book for good. Heracles, who will deserve a chapter of his own, breaks the device of punishment, and Zeus, who by then has heard the name he feared and married the nymph to a mortal to avoid his fate, allows the release. The chains clatter. Prometheus stands. The terms between king and trickster have shifted, not reconciliation exactly, but an armistice struck in the knowledge that both have already won what they wanted. Men keep their fires, Zeus keeps his throne. It is worth lingering, just long enough for the coals to settle, on the double bite of this myth. On one side, the clever friend to mortals, their advocate and architect, steals a basic technology and is tortured for it by a jealous autocrat. On the other, the sovereign, responsible for cosmic order, sees a subject tampering with the rituals that hold heaven to earth, and answers with a penalty meant to teach the limits of rebellion. Both readings are true. The Greeks were comfortable with the kind of honesty that produces two truths at once. Prometheus is courage and arrogance, remedy and provocation. Zeus is tyrant and guarantor, petty, and necessary. Meanwhile, Pandora does her own work in the background of houses. She is not an origin of women a story so much as a portrait of the trouble that enters the world in beautiful clothing. The jar, always a jar in the oldest mouths, sits on a shelf in every age. We call it by other names now, invention that solves one problem and produces three. Bargains struck quickly because the room is uncomfortable. Letters sent in anger, love reaching for what it cannot keep. Hope remains, good or dangerous as you choose. In the center of each house, Hestia still tends her circle. On the hearthstone, women and men both learn that warmth must be fed, that neglect is the slowest cold. Sometimes, when the wind runs clean from the east and the smoke from the village tilts just so, you can see the whole arrangement as if from Hermes' shoulder. There's a Titan on a cliff with his jaw set, a king under a mountain counting oaths, a blacksmith god reading fire like a scripture, a woman with a sealed jar thinking about mornings, a brother named Afterthought shaking his head at himself and then doing it again, a boy at the edge of a cave holding a fennel stalk to a stubborn ember. If stories are instruction, we have been told a great deal here that gifts come wrapped in grammar, that power, unguided, estranges itself from mercy, that cleverness unaccompanied by patience can poison its own victories, that hope, whatever else it is a thing we keep nearby because we are small and the night is large. Prometheus keeps his place in our memories not only because he suffered, but because his suffering gave a shape to a question we still haven't finished answering. What do you owe the future in a house ruled by fear? He chose to pay in liver and time. We choose in other currencies, comfort, reputation. An evening we did not spend looking at the coals and deciding carefully. Fire is old now. It sits behind switches, but the fennel stalk, the narthex, still grows at the edge of fields, tall and ordinary, waiting for someone to remember that progress, when it is honest, is only a loan taken against the strength of those who will sit after us by what we have lit. The gods arrange their households, and the world settles into its weather, but down below, where bread is earned and graves are dug, time writes a different scripture. If you ask the poets who stood closer to soil than to scepter, they will tell you that humankind has not been one people marching in a straight line, but many peoples layered like rings in a tree. Each ring carries its own shine and rot, and the knife that shows them is an old farmer's voice. He speaks of 5 ages. The first he calls golden, and you already know its monarch. It belongs to Kronos, to the long afternoon of a world newly freed from pressure and not yet taught to be afraid of its own children. Men of that era do not farm as later men do. The earth, newly relieved, is eager to give. Barley comes to hand like a promise remembered. Fruit leans down. The wind does not bully the fire, and no one knows the arithmetic of locks. There are no lawsuits because the word mine has not yet drawn blood. People do not age as we do. When their hour comes, it is a soft turn, like a sleeper rolling toward a warmer patch of sheet. Death is not yet an enemy. Afterward, their spirits hover as guardians, daimons, quiet and useful, shepherding fairness through the lanes like invisible marshals. They are not gods. They are close enough to remind us that goodness sometimes lingers the way heat lingers after bread is pulled from an oven. Then something turns. Kronos is cut from his chair. The new regime, bright and exact, cannot sustain that first mildness. The silver race stands up shyly in the gold's long shadow. They are handsome and tall, slow to ripen, children for a century, then suddenly violent, as if maturity were a kind of fever. They neglect altars, mutter at law, laugh in the face of those same demons that hover on their behalf. For their impiety and for the arrogance that come so easily to people who learned care too late, Zeus draws a line through the chapter. He buries them. Their shades do not become guardians. They go to the underworld like smoke the wind did not want, and their example is a caution scrawled in the margins henceforth. Quick bodies with slow minds are tinder. The third ring is a bronze, and you can feel the temperature drop when the knife reaches it. These men are made of ash tree and anvil, their houses dark with metal smell. They love war not for justice, but for its own heat. Bronze blades, bronze shields, bronze-plated words. Their knees remember only the stance of combat, and even their food tastes like iron in the mouth. They do not plant much, they sharpen instead. When they die, fields breathe easier. A few of their sons survive long enough to notice that even victory tastes metallic, and that the hearth is warmer than a bright spear. But it is not a lesson that entire generations can keep in their hands. The Bronze Age ends as it lived, clashing, unteachable, exhausted, and then for once, a rescue from the descent, before the world falls into its hardest chapter. A light burns bright for a little while. The heroic age is an interlude, not a steady climate. It arrives like one of those blue days after storm, when the air shows everything without cruelty. Men and women of this era are not better fed or less mortal than the bronze. They are simply larger at the joints of a story. Their blood runs mixed with the divine, sons and daughters of gods and human mothers, and their deeds have that quality small towns remember forever. Cities are built and tested. Oaths are made and broken. Monsters that are really metaphors are hunted down. Wars erupt that turn out to be dictionaries for every future grief. The Theban War opens the roll of sorrow. The Trojan War closes it. In between, Perseus lifts a blade without looking directly at what it cuts. Jason persuades 50 proud men to row in the same direction. Atalanta outruns suitors until an apple teaches her what almost every myth insists upon, that beauty and trickery often arrive together. The best of this breed, few, flawed, stubborn, earn the Isles of the Blessed, a far green west where spring holds its breath. The rest, most, earn the only immortality mortals can be sure of, story. If you are listening to the farmer's voice as he trims these rings with his knife, this is where it catches in his throat. The Iron Age, he says, is his, and it is ours, and it is heavy. It is not merely a time of metal tools and harder labors. It is a habit of a spirit. Dawn comes with tasks already stacked in the doorway. Children learn hunger's moods early. Friendships break under small weights. Guests forget the old rules of bread and salt. Hosts forget how to look a stranger in the eye and see a god. Work becomes the first commandment and the second and the third, and it still does not suffice. Justice, tall and golden once, grows thin and looks away more often than she looks up. There is a line the old poet loves, a little dagger he keeps in the sleeve of his story. Eidos and Nemesis, modesty and righteous shame, leave the earth, their bright dresses trailing dust. After that, the sound of lying grows louder in the market, and the young learn quickly that chests puffed with emptiness command attention, while hands stained with work do not. In this age, births are counted against harvests, and winter is not a storyteller but a landlord. It would be easy to stop there and sigh, but the farmer is more useful to us than our sighs are. He is not naive about the past. His golden age is not a policy proposal, it is a warning against nostalgia disguised as history. Even in that first ring, death still lives. Even in that easy garden, seriousness is required. And in iron, this stubborn, splintery present, there are still hearths that burn with Hestia's careful flame, still fields where Demeter answers a prayer muttered with a real humility, still courts where someone not entirely tired writes down a judgment that will keep a widow's house standing. He knows what we forget when we wrap ourselves in clever despair, that ages do not absolve us, they describe us. If you tilt the rings a little, you can see other truths catch the light. Gold is not just Chronos in a rocking chair. It is the memory that human hands can live without garrisoning every good thing. Silver is not only divine punishment, it is the reminder that children indulged for too long become adults who mistake appetite for law. Bronze is the acceleration of craft unaccompanied by conscience. Heroic is competence married to risk, sometimes beautiful, sometimes ruinous. Iron is what happens when fear becomes a policy. The gods do not disappear in this accounting, they change their distance. In gold, they are near enough to taste the fruit with us. In iron, they withdraw enough to make us decide whether we meant the oaths we mouthed when thunder was loud and we were frightened. The myths place this ladder in the mind not to make us pine for past ladders, but to teach us how to climb the one we're on. Even in iron, the rituals hold. The hearth is the same circle of warmth it was before. Bread is still bread. Babies still get named at a fire. Even hope, the last thing in that jar, is not merely a trick of light. It is choreography. It teaches wrists and shoulders the motions required to keep a house habitable. How to set the pot before you are starving. How to stroke a coal back into flame without wasting breath. How to say no to your own hurry so that the knife, the plow, the sentence, the kiss land true. And because the poets are honest, they let the edges blur. You can live a golden hour in an iron year. A silver insolence can flash even in a good period. A bronze afternoon can overcome a village that should have known better. A heroic courage might rise in a baker's boy who decides to stand in front of someone smaller than him when a mob comes laughing. Ages are not prisons. They are pressures. They are the weather. And like weather, they ask for roofs, for patience, for honest windows, and for the discipline to come inside when the sky says it is not friendly just now. At dusk, The farmer polished with his own sweat, ties up his blade, and tells you one more thing without saying it outright. The knife he used to reveal the rings is made of iron. He uses the age he laments to understand the others. We do this too. Every time we tell a story about a better morning to make tonight bearable. The gods may have the sky and the sea and the gate under the earth, but men and women have a small rectangle of a space around a table and the right to decide whether that space will be golden for an hour. In that decision, obscure and daily, the ages are made again. In the hush that follows the farmer's ledger of ages, the story pivots from peoples to persons, from rings of time to one bright thread pulled through them. Heroes begin to appear, not because the gods have grown bored, but because the world has discovered it needs particular names to steady its memory. The first among them to step out from the panel of myth with his chin lifted is Perseus, whose deeds feel like the draft version of every hero's job description that followed. His tale does not begin with a sword, but with a locked room and a frightened king. Achilles of Argos, hearing the oracular sentence that a daughter's son would kill him, made the usual royal mistake. He trusted architecture to solve fate. He shut Danae underground in a bronze chamber. Bronze was the age's answer to questions it could not argue with. Strong, simple, ringing. But the gods are not baffled by alloys. Zeus arrived not as a swaggering suitor, but as weather, a shower of gold that found every seam. From that soft invasion, the child took shape. When Achilles learned of the infant, he practiced piety by halves. He would not bloody his hands, but he would give water the knife's work. Mother and child were sealed in a chest and pushed out to sea, set adrift on Poseidon's shoulder as if the ocean were neutral. But the sea is as fond of stories as any hearth. The chest washed ashore on Seriphos, a lean island in the Cyclades where fishermen knew each stone by its patience. Dictys, a man whose hands had mended more nets than quarrels, found the box, lifted out the living, and did the simplest noble thing. He made room. Perseus grew in a house made of ropes, hooks, and honest hunger. He learned balance from boats, thrift from tides, and the way salt dries everything but kindness. There's a geometry to island life, sharp, spare, that fitted itself around him. Trouble, as always, traveled by Pallas. King Polydectes, Dictys' brother, saw Danae and decided that desire was law. Perseus had the bad luck to be both proud and decent. He would not allow his mother to be requisitioned by a man who mistook crown for consent. Polydectes, who preferred traps to daggers, announced a feigned wedding and demanded gifts from every man on the island, horses, costly things. The young fisherman's son had no herd to strip, so he made a boast, the kind that gets boys killed and turns them into legends. He would bring the king a better gift, the head of Medusa, the mortal Gorgon, whose face could halt the living mid-breath and persuade them into stone. It was a cruelty wrapped as a dare. No one had returned from that errand. The Gorgons lived at the world's hinge, where night forgets to lift its hem. Their names were ancient as fear, Steno, Euryale, and Medusa, the only one who could bleed. Serpents coiled where hair should have grown. Bronze hands gleamed like verdicts. Wings lent swiftness to a malice that did not need it. But where traps delight kings, quests attract gods. Athena, whose temples once suffered insult at Poseidon's hands, and Medusa's fate tangled with that insult, took notice. Hermes, for whom theft and aid are often the same gesture, smiled. They did not give Perseus a strength. They gave him method. From Hermes came a curved blade, the harp that bit like a new idea. From Athena, a shield polished to mirror truth, so that a man could watch a monster without surrendering his eyes. They sent him first to the Graeae, the Grey sisters, Dano, Enyo, and Pemphredo, who shared a single eye and a single tooth between them, as if time had already rationed their bodies. Perseus waited until the eye passed from socket to hand, then took it. Thieves in the stories are often thieves on behalf of the future. Holding their sight hostage, he demanded directions. They gave them with a hiss and a blessing, too tangled to be called that. The road after that felt more like a riddle than a path. The nymphs of the north provided the last tools, the kibisis, a bag to hold what the world should not see, the talaria, winged sandals that turn the air into a road, and the helm of Hades, which does not make its wearer vanish so much as teach the world to stop noticing him. Thus armored with gifts that were all versions of discretion, Perseus flew to the edge of maps. He found the sisters asleep among statues that used to be men. The wind tasted like iron. He did not look. He looked at the shield, letting reflection do the work that directness would ruin. The harp flashed in the mirror, a line of thought drawn through a nightmare, and with one clean stroke he severed the mortal neck. From the red geometry of that cut sprang two impossibilities. Pegasus, the winged horse who is the sky learning to gallop, and Chrysaor, the golden warrior, both children of Poseidon, sired in violence and born in escape. The other Gorgons woke into their shriek. He pulled the helm over his hair, and the world forgot him. Into the bag went the head, still potent, still busy. On the way home, as stories like to arrange it, a different kind of wrong asked for righting. On a crag above the sea, a girl stood chained to rock, Andromeda, daughter of Cepheus and Cassiopeia, whose mother's boast against the Nereids had called a sea god's attention the way glass calls a stone's, to quiet the punishment. The parents had offered their child to a flood-born monster. The creature rose from the foam with all the patience of consequences, and Perseus, who had not come to kill for the sport, but to keep boasts from breaking good homes, acted. Some say he cut chains and fought with the blade. Others say he threw a cloth back from the kibises and made the sea beast atone before it could open its hunger. Either way, the calculus that had weighed a daughter against a city failed in the face of a stranger's courage. He claimed Andromeda for his wife and, depending on which teller is speaking, later set her crown among the constellations. A curve of stars like a wedding garland hung too high for theft. The road back to Sherphos, where he carried one more errand. At a king's garden in the far west, Atlas's land, Perseus asked for shelter and was refused. In some versions, he lifted the Gorgon's head, and the great guardian trembled into mountain. Shoulders made permanent, a snow cap for a crown, his labor at last an unmoving kindness. The poets who love geography make much of this. They show maps the way old men show scars. He landed at last on the little island where Polydectes had practiced cruelty as a strategy. The king mocked the tale, as men who have never left their chairs often mock wind and danger. So Perseus drew out the heavy sack and made the room honest, stone where courtiers had stood, stone where Polydectes had smiled, stone like a lesson that does not require commentary. It was not a slaughter, it was a correction. Then he set a good man on the throne, Dictys, the fisherman who had done mercy without a budget. And in that gesture, you can feel the story teaching the value of measuring kings not by crowns, but by hands. Athena did not let the head molder in a bag. She fixed it to her aegis, the goatskin shield that is as much principle as armor. There it became a warning that wisdom holds terror in trust, that beauty misused can be turned to the defense of the city, that some victories must be preserved as responsibilities lest they spoil. Perseus himself did not keep every shining thing. He returned the helm to Hades, the sandals to Hermes, the blade to its owner. Heroes do not call borrowed light their own, and the prophecy, it kept its appointment, though it took the long way around. Achilles fled Argos when he heard that the boy he had abandoned to drowning now walked the earth with a sack that made men into statues. He died not by assassination, but by accident, the sort of clean, cruel accident that makes seers seem smug. At the funeral games of a northern king in Larissa, Perseus threw a discus. The wind took it. The crowd surged. The old man in the wrong place fell. The circle closed as softly and sharply as a lid. Fate often prefers plausibility to spectacle. Afterward, Perseus built, as if to argue with the blood. He ruled Tiryns, founded Mycenae, the city that would one day send Agamemnon to Troy, and seeded lines of kings. From his marriage with Andromeda came children, whose names the world remembers, mostly because of the man who would be born down that branch. Heracles, great-grandson and proof that their strength can be taught grief and remain useful. The night sky kept the memory as well. Perseus, Andromeda, Cassiopeia, Cepheus, and Cetus, the sea beast, are arranged permanently on the heaven's dark wall, a cautionary mural and a love story sewn in light. It is tempting to make Perseus only the one who beheaded a monster. He is also the boy who trusted polished metal over bravado, who accepted help without shame, who returned what he had borrowed, who refrained from using a terrible tool for small quarrels, who made a fisherman a king because kindness had already proved its right to rule. That is the quiet curriculum under the bright deed. Later heroes will wrestle lions and hold up skies and break doors in hell. But this first apprentice in the craft sets the tone. Do the difficult thing without looking directly into its eyes. Do not mistake gifts for property. When you must kill, end a cruelty, not start one. The gods watch these human experiments with a complicated expression. Part pride, part worry. Athena, who favors cities over storms, nods when a mortal learns to use a mirror for more than vanity. Hermes grins when a theft unhooks an old injustice. Poseidon scowls when men cast too easily into his depth the burdens they cannot solve. Hera makes a note when a woman is saved rather than spent. And somewhere on a cliff that watches both Caucasus and the Aegean, an old Titan chained for his audacity understands that this boy, this grandson of a locked room and a lie, has proven his thesis that mortals, given fire and a method, can shape their world into something resembling justice. If Perseus was the draft copy of heroism, Heracles is the finished script written in muscle and smoke. His name carries like weather over mountains, and everywhere it goes, the old lesson follows. A strength alone is noisy, a strength with sorrow becomes law. He is Zeus's son, which already means trouble, and Alcmene's, a queen whose goodness did not protect her from divine attention. Zeus came to her disguised as her husband Amphitryon, lengthening a single night into 3. In the same house, real Amphitryon later returned and fathered Iphicles. Twins were born, one mortal, one built for noise, and Hera, who counted truth more closely than Zeus did, watched from a distance with a ledger no flame could burn. The cradle tried to end the story before it began. 2 snakes slid into the nursery, scales whispering over rushes. Iphicles wailed. The other infant reached out with hands that looked like any baby's hands and squeezed until the coils were rope. Nurses came with their shouts already failing. The snakes lay like discarded jewelry. Fame, which has a keen ear, turned its head. Boyhood was a tutor's parade. Music to steady the mind, archery to teach distance, wrestling to learn how to say no with your shoulders, chariot craft to understand speed that isn't panic. Heracles excelled and did not always behave. He was a magnet for instruction and for trouble. Then a steadier life offered itself. Marriage to Megara, daughter of the Theban king Creon, children, hearth. A hero's hands put to ordinary uses, killing threats that needed killing, lifting more than his share when harvest asked for it. For a time, the house was ordinary, and it was good. Hera had not forgotten. Madness came like a summer storm that refuses to announce itself. Heracles' sight clouded. Enemies wore familiar faces. The rooms in his house became theaters for the worst kind of play. When the fog lifted, he was kneeling in the wreckage of his own life. No god answered crying. He did the one right thing left. He sought judgment. The Pythia at Delphi told him what justice always tells the strong serve. He must submit to Eurystheus, king of tyrants, a smaller man with a longer sentence, and complete labors so humiliatingly impossible that even the gods would have to watch. Redemption, when it is real, is a long verb. The first task faced him with an animal that could not be cut. The Nemean lion hide thick as arithmetic. Arrows bounced, swords dented. In its cave, Heracles found the only instrument that worked, his own arms. He strangled the monster, skinned it with its own claw, and wore the pelt thereafter like a second decision. The second labor multiplied necks. The Lernaean hydra, 9-headed and hissing out of a swamp that never dried. Every cut bred 2 more mouths. Iolaus, nephew and friend, learned quickly and brought fire. Each stump was seared before it could repent the injury. The immortal head went under a rock. The black ichor dipped Heracles' arrows into a new category of danger. Eurystheus, nervous at effectiveness, ruled this labor invalid. There had been help. Fear is inventive when scoring. Then gentleness, the Ceryneian hind, golden-horned and sacred to Artemis. Heracles chased for a year without breaking the creature. When at last he caught it, he did so with the care of a man putting down a sleeping child. Artemis objected until she saw the gentleness. The stag returned to the woods unbloodied. Back to force, the Erymanthian boar dragged from snow and thicket with so much noise that Eurystheus hid in a bronze jar. Between these errands, a grim accident, a centaur's whine, an arrow's mischief, the immortal Chiron wounded by a poison that would not forgive. The world learned then that even goodness has no diplomatic immunity in a house full of weapons. Fifth came filth. Augeas, lord of stables so long unclean that smell had become weather, demanded cleansing in a day. Heracles rerouted 2 rivers as if they were stubborn men, and made water do what brooms could not, because he had asked for pay, and because Eurystheus was compiling grievances into doctrine. This labor, too, was ruled invalid. So the list grew. 6th, the Stymphalian birds, metal-beaked and murderous, lifted from a reeking marsh by the clatter of Athena's rattle and shot from the air. 7th, the Cretan bull, once proud in Poseidon's foam and now loose on land, thrown to earth and led away, hooves carving punctuation marks behind. 8th, the mares of Diomedes trained to love human flesh. Heracles fed their master to his own horses and learned a dark truth about cycles. 9th, the girdle of Hippolyta, Amazon queen. At first, persuasion worked. Then Hera walked the camps whispering that the stranger meant theft. Swords drew, the queen fell, the bell changed hands in a grief that never stops arguing. 10th, the cattle of Geryon on the reed island of Erythea in the far west. To reach them, he crossed deserts so loud with heat that he shot an arrow at the sun. Helios, amused, lent him a golden cup to ferry in, a boat shaped like the day. He killed the triple-bodied giant, the herdsman, and the dog. He marched the cattle home over roads that learned his footsteps. He set up 2 pillars at the Straits, where Europe narrows toward Africa, souvenirs the horizon still wears, 2 labors remained, added because 2 had been struck from the record, and because Eurystheus hoped that geography might accomplish what monsters could not. 11th, the golden apples of the Hesperides, guarded by a serpent coiled around the world's memory. Some say he caught old Nereus on a shore and would not let the shapeshifter go until directions stopped changing. Others, that he traded burdens with Atlas, taking the sky on his shoulders while the Titan fetched the fruit. When Atlas returned and tried to leave the firmament on Heracles' back, the hero asked for a moment to pad his cloak and shifted the weight back with a smile polite as guile. He walked away with light tucked under his arm. 12th, the underworld's gate. No sword, said the condition. No trickery, said the judges. Heracles descended with Hermes for a guide and Athena for a blessing. Hades allowed the attempt if the beast were mastered without iron. The 3 heads of Cerberus snapped at air and at the shape of fear. Heracles gripped the dog by the throat until the lesson took. He returned, trailing the sound of chains and a kind of awe that men do not admit at table. Eurystheus, seeing the underworld's porter alive where no living man should lead him, ended the assignment book. Redemption, painfully bought, had been paid for with monsters, rivers, and a walk in the dark. Between and after these labors, the map grew denser with episodes that show another part of his strength. He threw down the Egyptian king Busiris, who dressed human sacrifice as hospitality. He wrestled Antaeus, who could not be killed while touching his mother earth, and solved the problem by lifting him off the ground until breath forgot its job. He diverted the course of fate for Admetus by going to death's door and winning back Alcestis, a wife who had taken her husband's place, proof, for once, that even in Greek stories, the love that keeps vows can be rewarded. He strode past the Caucasus and loosed the eagle from Prometheus's liver, like a man with a minute to spare doing a kindness centuries had begged for. But gods keep their old grudges quieter, not weaker. Heracles married again Deianira, whose name already sounds like a shadow, and tried to live as men live. On a riverbank, the centaur Nessus offered to ferry her across and reached instead for violation. Heracles' arrow, tipped with Hydra's blackness, found him, dying. Nessus lied with expert clarity, telling Deianira that his blood would be a charm to keep her husband constant. Later, when rumor made her hands shake, she soaked a tunic in that blood and sent it to Heracles as a cure for straying. He put it on. The poison woke under his skin like a court that has finally found jurisdiction. Pain burned through the strongest back the world had made. No water put it out. No tearing cloth could separate flame from flesh. On Mount Oeta, he built his own pyre, stacked wood the way a man stacks reasons, and lay upon it. Friends wept, but feared the act that would make them accomplices. A stranger, Philoctetes in most mouths, or his father, stepped forward with a simple courage, lit the brush, and received in payment Heracles' bow and arrows, the future of Troy hinging quietly on the trade. Fire did what poison could not decide how to finish. Zeus took the smoke and the man. On Olympus, the quarrel that had arranged Heracles' whole life, the cold war between Hera and the proof of her husband's appetites, ended not with capitulation, but with adoption. She gave him her daughter, Hebe, goddess of youth, as wife, and Heracles took a seat among the immortals he had so often worked for without thanks. Down below, where smoke becomes a story, men raised altars. The hero became a god and also remained what villages needed: a patron for wrestlers, a name to shout when a beam needed lifting, a statue to wreath before contests. In some places he is mild, in others dangerous. In all, he is available. His labors became a measure, not because anyone will fight that many monsters, but because everyone will, if they live long enough, encounter tasks that feel invulnerable, messes that must be cleaned in a day without complaint, journeys that require borrowing help, surrenders that look like victories from the right angle, griefs that are finally not survivable unless you decide how to end them. If Perseus taught that method outwits terror, Heracles adds a second theorem: that penance can be muscular, that work can become a sacrament, that the strongest man on earth becomes worthy of worship only by learning how to obey. This is not the end of heroism, only its loudest stanza. Athens waits across the next hill, sharpening a different tool, politics, and sending its prince out along the dangerous roads between villages with less bellow and more law. Athens did not need a thunderbolt. It needed a man who could make a road safe and a city larger than its walls. If Heracles is the hymn you sing when a boulder sits in your doorway, Theseus is the rule you write, so doorways cannot be stolen again. His story begins in a night and uncertainty, with a double paternity that suits a city destined to live by land and sea at once. Aegeus, king of Athens, sought an heir and found instead a riddle. Poseidon, who never missed a chance to salt a lineage, laid a god's claim upon the same child. Aethra, the boy's mother, raised him far from the Acropolis in Trojan. Before he left, Aegeus hid a sword and sandals beneath a stone and told Aethra that when the boy could lift it, he would be ready to claim his name. He grew long in the limb and quick in the eye, and one morning the stone moved like a truth, finally admitted. He could have sailed to Athens. The sea was his by rumor, and ships forgive a lot. Instead, he chose the land route, the longer, dirtier way, because kingship that matters is earned at ground level. The road south along the Saronic Gulf was less a path than a collection of crimes. Theseus answered each outrage with its own medicine, not from cruelty, but from a lawyer's sense that punishment ought to educate. Periphetes, the club-bearer, was first, son of Hephaestus, lame and fond of making strangers into fables told by widows. Theseus took his club and kept it, the wood dark and smooth under his hand like an oath. Then Sinis, the pine-bender, who tied travelers to the bent trunks and let the trees remember their strength. Theseus gave him his own lesson in elasticity. The Crommyonian sow followed a monstrous boar, or a notorious bandit woman named Phaia, depending on the teller, put down so farmers could sleep through wind without flinching. On a cliff above the waves, Siren demanded foot washing from passers-by and kicked them to the waiting turtle below. Theseus returned the courtesy and let the turtle keep its old appointment. Curtion, a wrestler who loved the crack of bones more than the art, met a man who knew how to use leverage instead of rage. Finally, Procrustes, the host who made his guests fit the bed by stretching or cutting them, found that his own frame did not please his own rule. When Theseus had finished, the road breathed like healed wound, and rumor ran ahead of him to Athens. The city he entered was clever and anxious. Medea, now wife to Aegeus, read the danger in the boy's face and plotted a cup bitter enough to erase it. But recognition is a stubborn arch in these stories. The sword and sandals were laid down at the right moment. A father saw himself in the slant of a blade. Aegeus struck the cup aside. The king embraced his son before the room could remember its reasons, and Medea, whose plans do not like witnesses, vanished into the next legend. Theseus did not sit. A city tests a new prince by handing him old tasks. He captured the Marathonian bull, a creature out of Poseidon's overreach. and paraded it through streets that needed to learn what order looks like. He put down the last of the house of Pallas, the Pallantides, who plotted in shadows against Aegeus. He did the work of making quarrels honest or impossible. Then Athens flinched as an older debt knocked. Years before, Minos of Crete had punished the city for a murdered son, Andromache, with a tribute in flesh. Every so often 7 youths and 7 maidens sailed to Knossos to feed a monster that lived in a maze, a minotaur, born of a queen's curse and a king's arrogance, penned by Daedalus's ingenuity into a prison without maps. When the next lot fell, Theseus stepped forward and called it volunteer. He promised his father that if he lived, he would change the ship's sails from black to white for the homecoming. Aegeus put his hope in cloth. On Crete, the gods as ever complicated fate with love. Ariadne, Minos' daughter, saw the Athenian and wanted not jewelry but justice. She brought a ball of thread and the simple instruction that embarrasses even brilliant men. Tie one end to the door and do not let go. Some say she gave him a sword as well. Others that his hands were enough. Theseus entered the turns that make strong minds small and found the creature at the maze's heart. Man in the shoulders, bull in the skull, loneliness standing on hoof. He killed it, clean in some tellings, brutally in others, and followed the line of thread back to the door, proof that invention and courage make a better pair than either alone. He fled with Ariadne and the Athenian youths into the night. On Naxos their stories fork. In one version, he abandoned her. Politics colder than romance. In another, Dionysus arrived with a retinue that sounded like harvest and winter at once, claimed her as his, and set her bridal crown among the stars, where it still throws a delicate curve. Corona Borealis across summer. Either way, the ship shoved off. And Athens rose in the distance like relief. Grief met it first. In joy or exhaustion, both are careless. Theseus forgot the sails. Black cloth bellied toward the promontory. Aegeus, watching from the cliff that bears his name, saw morning where there should have been miracle and let the sea take him. Kings do not always die at swords' ends. Sometimes they die at the mercy of die. The water below would be called Aegean thereafter, a map keeping a father's last misunderstanding. So Theseus took the city not as a son eased into inheritance, but as a man who had cost it a king. He ruled with a builder's impatience. Athens was not a single fist. It was a scattered villages with their own pride and wells. He drew them together. Synoecism, the Greeks would call it, binding Attica under one civic idea. He founded a common hearth in the Prytaneon, so that every clan's fire could pretend kinship with the city's flame. He trimmed titles until they fit citizens and carved the population into tribes and demes, so that when a man said we, he meant more than his cousins. He renewed the Panathenaea, a festival that walked the city's memory through its own streets. It was politics practiced as ritual, and ritual practiced as rehearsal for fairness. Even his wars fit this grammar. When the Amazons crossed into Attica, whether to avenge a queen abducted Antiope, or Hippolyta, or simply to test a frontier, Theseus met them not as trophies, but as an army. The Amazonomachy raged in the shadow of the Acropolis until a treaty cooled the stones. From his union with the Amazon came Hippolytus, a boy too chaste for his father's house and too handsome for his stepmother's peace. In time, Phaedra loved him without consent, lied when refused, and ended herself. Theseus, who had faced monsters, maps, and law, failed in the domestic trial that undoes so many heroes. He cursed the innocent and learned too late that rumor can kill what swords cannot. The sea answered his prayer with a bull that frightened horses to death, and Hippolytus was dragged beneath his own chariot. Repentance came, as it often does, when the messenger had already finished speaking. He was not finished with bad companions. Pirithous, king of the Lapiths, and a man whose courage outran his judgment, swore brotherhood to Theseus and proposed the most asinine of quests. Each would steal a daughter of Zeus. Theseus took Helen young. The Dioscuri later recovered her, and that theft would echo at Troy like a delayed punishment. Pirithous demanded Persephone herself, queen of the underworld. The two descended and sat upon a rock Hades had set for guests who needed humbling, the chair of forgetfulness. Roots of habit grew through their thighs. Heracles, on his own errand, passed by and pulled Theseus free with a wrench that left flesh behind. Pirithous stayed. Some friends you cannot fetch back. Athens, by then as clever as its stories, grew impatient with kings altogether. Theseus' reforms taught the city to think like citizens, and then left it unsurprised when citizens preferred self-rule to gratitude. He sailed away to Skyros, perhaps to recover, perhaps to recruit. There, a small king named Lycomedes, jealous or political or simply afraid, pushed him from a cliff. No pyre, no song. Sea and rock did the last work. Centuries later, when Athens wanted a strength of its myths for its own uses, a general named Cimon would bring Theseus's bones home and lay them in a shrine at the city's heart, as if to say that whatever goodness begins alone on a road belongs finally to the people. This is why his name stays warm on a city's tongue. He did not found a religion or judge the weather. He walked the public space between houses and made it safe enough for argument. He cleared roads and then invented reasons to share them. He refused the labyrinth's premise and stepped back into daylight, holding the thread that every polis must learn to keep taut between past and future, where Heracles teaches that a man can atone with labor. Theseus teaches that a city can be built out of debts paid forward, a festival that remembers, a law that fits, a road that returns to itself without monsters. If you stand on the Areopagus at dusk and watch swifts write their quick opinions above the stone, you can almost hear him measuring the city again, not in cubits or acres, but in the space between citizens who disagree and still keep a common hearth. Athens would break your heart often enough in the centuries to come. That is what cities do. But when it called itself civilized, it meant Theseus, the prince who chose the land road and never quite left it, long before the beach at Troy filled with black-prowed ships. There was another armada of one, oars carving a first line across water that maps would later learn to respect. The voyage had a name the world would not forget: the quest for the golden fleece, it did not begin with a trumpet, but with an old fear and a young man crossing a river barefoot on one side. Jason was born into a stolen house. His uncle Peleus had shouldered his father Aeson off the throne of Iolcus and meant to tidy away every rival. A baby is inconvenient to murder in a palace where omens are a second language, so the child was smuggled to the cave school of Chiron, that unusual centaur who taught boys to be men without making them forget to be kind. There, Jason learned the bow and the lyre, the names of herbs, the mathematics of diplomacy, the small mercies that make camps livable. When he came of age, Hera, disguised as an old woman at a ford, tested him the way gods test mortals they mean to use. He lifted her on his back to cross and lost a sandal in the mud. It was a detail with teeth. Peleus had heard a prophecy long ago, beware the man with one sandal. The throne room panic that followed Jason's return wore a smile. Cowardice likes pageantry. Peleus would not kill a nephew in the light. He posed a task instead, polished as a favor. Fetch me, he said, the golden fleece from Colchis at the far edge of the world, a relic nailed to an oak in a god-haunted grove. Bring back that miracle, and the crown is yours. In that sentence, hope and trap lay down together. A ship had to be made worthy of impossibility. Argus built it under Athena's eye, and with her gift set a speaking timber from Dodona in its prow, an oracular oak that could murmur warning when charts fell silent. They named the vessel Argo, and men from all corners of Greece came because fame is a beacon, even to those with good lives. Heracles stepped aboard, heavy as a promise. Orpheus brought his lyre to time the oar strokes and silent storms. Atalanta's astride argued with old customs, and the crew made room. Castor and Pollux, boxers blessed by twin stars, came laughing. Zetes and Calais, the winged sons of the north wind, shook feathers into sunlight. Others, many, each with a story folded like a letter inside a breastplate. They became the Argonauts, not because they were saints, but because they could pull the same direction when goddess and weather demanded it. The first land was Lemnos, where the women had killed their husbands and now governed alone. Hospitality can be another form of grief. Jason lay with Hypsipyle and left sons behind, history's quiet collateral. Heracles grew impatient with softness. The oars took up their sentence again. In Thrace, they found Phineus, a blind seer punished by Apollo, tormented by harpies that fouled every meal before it reached his lips. The Boreads drove the creatures off, gentling his table with pursuit. And Phineus, grateful and exact, gave a gift that saves more lives than swords do. Directions. Beware the simple gades, he said, the clashing rocks that shut like jaws upon any ship. Send a dove first. If it passes with only a feather plucked, follow quickly. The path will open and never close on you again. The dove flew. A single tail feather drifted down like a price paid. The Argo shot through with inches to spare. Behind it, the stones froze forever in their last argument. Water widened and turned dark. Euxine. Men would later call it the Black Sea, and distance became as much a danger as monsters. At last, the oars whitened with the spray of Colchis. a land of ironwork and guarded oaths, ruled by Aedes, son of the sun. Strangers were sacred there, but kings know how to keep hospitality on a leash. Aedes agreed to gift the fleece if Jason could first do 3 tasks set like riddles with teeth. Yoke fire-breathing bulls and plow a field with them, sow that field with dragon's teeth. Defeat the earth-born warriors who would spring up armed from the furrows. Left to his courage alone, Jason would have died cleanly and young. The gods changed the problem set. Hera, still fond of the river-crossing boy, and Athena, who admires a plan, turn to Aphrodite and ask for a loan only she can give. Eros's arrow found Medea, the king's daughter and priestess of Hecate, scholar of herbs and night. Love in these stories is never a soft garment. It is a binding oath whispered to the bones. Medea took Jason to the edge of sacred groves and taught him how the world could be asked to bend. She gave him an ointment brewed from Promethean root to make his skin proof against flame. She taught him to throw a stone among the teeth-born warriors so that they would turn on each other, confused by the echo of their own violence. She said words to Sleep, the sleepless serpent that guarded the oak where the fleece hung. Gold as harvest, heavy as a promise no one can keep alone. The tasks bent before method and magic. Bulls that burned with breath lowered their iron necks to the yoke. The plow scored the field. Teeth went in like bad seed. Spearmen rose from the soil, glittering and loud, then fell on one another when a single rock taught them distrust. The dragon's coils loosened beneath Medea's spell. Jason lifted the fleece from the tree, its wool warm as if it remembered backs. He did not lift it alone. This is the story's hinge. He does nothing alone from here forward. Flight is an art men learn too late. Aeetes pursued with ships and curses. Medea bought time with blood. She took her younger brother Apsyrtus onto the deck, killed him, and scattered his limbs into the sea, so that their father must stop and gather what the law of grief demanded. It is the ugliest of sacrifices, and the poets never wash it clean. The Argo fled past islands that learned to spell guilt in their own tongues. On Crete, the bronze giant Talos strode the shore, hurling rocks until Medea tricked him into pulling the bronze nail from his heel that plugged his single vein. Ichor poured out, and he stiffened into a statue. None would dare worship. They came home estranged with distance. Peleus did not, of course, keep his promise. Men who assign impossible tasks seldom greet success with surrender. Medea changed the field again. She showed Peleus' daughters a trick: cut an old ram to pieces, boil him with herbs, and watch a lamb leap from the pot. The king, persuaded toward rejuvenation, went under the knife of his own blood. But the potion missing its goddess turned out to be only a stew. Iolcus rose in horror. Jason and Medea were exiled to Corinth, and the crown of Iolcus went elsewhere. Ambition had purchased a different address with its coins. For a while, the city let them live quiet. Time did what it always does to people stitched together by crisis. It taught them other wants. Jason cast his eye toward a local princess, Glauce, some say Creusa, and toward the legitimacy a new marriage would buy. Medea pleaded, argued, remembered the brother whose pieces still troubled birds, the father she had betrayed, the home she had set on fire behind her. When Jason smiled like a man who thinks he has learned from heroes how to be practical, she made a plan that has terrified and fascinated audiences ever since because it refuses to be forgot or forgiven. She sent the bride a dress soaked in something that loves flame more than skin. The cloth clasped, the fire took, the palace burned. Then, in the privacy grief always chooses, Medea killed the sons she had borne Jason. Some versions soften it with an accident. Most do not. She climbed into a chariot drawn by dragons, Helios' gift to his granddaughter, and vanished into air that did not judge. Jason lived on. Time without glory is a long corridor. Years later, he went to sit in the shade of his old ship, now beached, its timbers drying into memory. A beam fell. The hero who had gathered the best men of his age died under the ribs of his adventure, not with a shout, but with a thud. The speaking prow, if it had one word left, did not spend it. What did the voyage deliver? Not a throne kept, not a marriage saved, not a city satisfied. It delivered something colder and more useful, a demonstration that oaths and oars can carry men into wonder and return them with their hands scarred and their names complicated. The Argo's keel cut more than water. It cut the Greek imagination into a new shape, where comradeship matters until it doesn't, where gods meddle but do not repair the tear they start, where a woman's brilliance saves the day and is blamed for the night. The golden fleece itself, once the skin of a ram that saved children and then became a standard of kingship, teaches finally that symbols are dangerous to fetch and heavier to carry home. In this tale, Hera tests, Athena advises, Aphrodite wounds by helping. Hecate watches her student spend her gifts. Helios loans dragons, as if to say that even daylight keeps a shadow in reserve. Jason stands at the center, heroic and inadequate, a man who could lead a crew past clashing rock, but not lead his own heart through a quiet city. Medea stands beside him, a mind like a clear knife, a portrait of power in a world that gives women few honorable uses for it. Between them, the ship passes, and we learn that voyages change not only shores, but souls. Thebes begins not with walls, but with a search. A Phoenician prince named Cadmus sailed west, looking for his sister Europa, who had been carried off by a white bull with a god inside it. He asked the oracle at Delphi where to turn when searching becomes a ritual and not a hope. "Stop looking," came Apollo's answer in the smoke. "Follow the cow and build where she lies down." It is not the advice kings prefer. Kings like maps, but Cadmus obeyed. The cow wandered inland until, on a hill near a spring, she folded her legs and made the ground a promise. Cadmus sent men to fetch water for the first sacrifice. They did not return. A great serpent sacred to Ares guarded the spring, and by the time Cadmus arrived with a spear, the creature's coils were strung with his companions. He killed it. First blood in a city that would never be rid of the color. And Athena, pleased at industry, told him to sow the dragon's teeth. From the furrows sprang the Spartoi, sown men, full grown and armed, a harvest of his soldiers. They attacked one another at once, a civil war born in a single breath, until only 5 stood: Ichion, Eudaeus, Chthonius, Hyperenor, and Pelorus. These 5 became the city's first aristocrats, a reminder that Thebes would always grow out of something torn. Ares demanded penance for his serpent. Cadmus served the war god for 8 years, the kind of service that leaves a man quiet, and was then allowed to marry Harmonia, Ares' daughter by Aphrodite. All the gods attended their wedding. Hephaestus put a necklace at the bride's throat, a work of perfect craft and careful malice, beauty that would carry misfortune forward like a seed in a traveler's cloak. The necklace passed from woman to woman, and ruin traveled with it. Cadmus and Harmonia grew old. Later tellers, who like to finish what they begin, said they turned into serpents and slid away toward a greener silence. Their city remained, an argument made of a stone, the house of Cadmus filled with daughters and disasters. Semele, beloved of Zeus, was tricked by Hera into demanding to see her lover as he truly was. Thunder undid her, and the unborn child, Dionysus, was sewn into Zeus's thigh and carried to term there, twice born and destined to bring ecstasy and unraveling back to Thebes. Ino married Athamas, and later, in a madness the gods sometimes called sport, threw her child into the sea and leapt after. The waves made them into sea deities, white of hair, called on by sailors who preferred mercy to weather. Autonoe's son Actaeon saw Artemis bathing. The goddess, who does not negotiate her privacy, turned him into a stag, and his own hounds finished the judgment. Agave, mother of Pentheus, would one day follow the god of wine up the mountain and come down with a head in her hands, believing in her frenzy that it was a lion's. The necklace glimmered at the edges of each story like a signature, but it was through Laius, great-grandson of Cadmus, that Thebes' most careful doom arranged itself. Exiled as a boy, he learned a crime in foreign halls, abducted a prince, some say, and the curse of violated hospitality shadowed him back to his own throne. He married Jocasta. An oracle spoke in the straightest possible grammar. If he had a son, that son would kill him and marry his mother. The sane response would be chastity. Myth prefers momentum. A child was born. Laius pierced the baby's ankles, tied them together, and gave him to a herdsman to expose on Mount Cithaeron. Pity changed the route. The servant handed the infant to a Corinthian shepherd, and the child was brought to the childless court of Polybus and Merope. They named him Oedipus, swollen foot, because names in Greek stories often come with receipts. He grew clever and proud under a roof that felt like love. Rumor found him. He went to Delphi seeking truth and received instead the same blunt prophecy his birth father had heard, without footnotes. You will kill your father and marry your mother. Believing Polybus and Merope to be those reference, Oedipus fled Corinth toward Thebes, doing exactly what fate needed from him. At a crossroads, chariots met, words turned into insults, whips flashed. A stranger struck him. Oedipus answered with fatal efficiency and left a body in the dust, the body of Laius, the father he did not know. Thebes, meanwhile, lay under a different pressure. A sphinx had nested near the road, devouring travelers who failed her riddle. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening, Oedipus answered without borrowing time. Man, the Sphinx threw herself from her perch. Riddles do not enjoy being solved. Gratitude is a political instrument in cities that cannot breathe. The people offered Oedipus Jocasta's hand and the throne. He married his mother because the world had been arranged to make sense only to oracles. Years passed. Sons and daughters were born. Eteocles, Polynices, Antigone, Ismene, and Thebes prospered. Plague came, crops failed, wombs failed, the air itself felt punished. Oedipus, who had saved the city once by answering a riddle, became a riddle in turn. How to cure a curse caused by a crime the curer does not see. He sent for Tiresias, the blind prophet who knows too much. Tiresias, weary and exact, named the murderer of Laius, you. Oedipus raged, accused conspiracies, and launched an investigation that uncovered the truth piece by nauseating peace. The messenger from Corinth who announced Polybus's death, the herdsman who could not quite lie, the scars at his ankles, the knowledge in Jocasta's face when the last knot unloosed. Jocasta hung herself. Oedipus took the pins from her dress and put out his eyes. He asked to be exiled, and Thebes obliged. He wandered. Antigone, faithful beyond reason, led him by the hand to Colonus, a grove outside Athens sacred to the Eumenides, the kindly ones who are not kind. There, under Athenian protection, Oedipus found a strange peace. He cursed his sons for their ambition, blessed his daughters for their steadiness, and then the earth opened for him. He was drawn into it silently. No grave mark speaks his name. Some say his presence made Athens a little safer forever. The way a good man's last words sometimes keep a house standing through wind, it has no right to survive. Back in Thebes, his sons enacted a different lesson. Eteocles and Polynices had agreed to share the throne by alternating years. Eteocles kept his year and kept the next. Polynices went to Argos, married Adrastus's daughter, and returned with an army, the 7 against Thebes, each champion sworn to a gate. Adrastus, Tydeus, the boar-spirited. Capaneus, who bragged he would scale the walls and was struck by Zeus for his insolence. Hippomedon, Parthenopeus the young, Polynices himself, and Amphiaraus the seer, dragged to the war by a treacherous bargain and swallowed by the earth at the last. God snatched to spare him disgrace. The siege ground on. In the end, the brothers met before the 7th gate and killed each other in the dust. A perfect conclusion, according to the mathematics of curses. Creon, Jocasta's brother, took the throne. A reasonable man stood where reason is insufficient. He decreed that Eteocles would be buried with honor and Polynices left unburied for dogs and sun. The worst insult in a world where the dead require escort. Antigone refused the arithmetic that measures kin by politics. She sprinkled dust on her brother's body and spoke the old words. Caught. She argued from a higher law, unwritten, ancient, cleaner than decrees. Creon argued from order, as rulers must. He sealed her alive in a rock tomb. His son Haman, who loved her, followed her into death. Eurydice, Creon's wife, ended herself after them. Thebes survived the day, but rule had turned into ash in a careful man's mouth. The city's tragedies braid like ropes, a necklace glinting darkly as it passes from throat to throat, a curse muttered in one generation, growing a second head in the next, a king who answers an animal's riddle, but not his own, a law that forgets the dead, and in doing so, forgets its purpose. If you stand on the Cadmea, the citadel, the wind does not tell you who was right. It merely lists what happened, which is what history does. Cadmus killed a serpent, so a city could drink. He sowed its teeth and discovered that soldiers come quickest when planted without thought. Laius tried to distract prophecy with cruelty and discovered that cruelty is prophecy's favorite ally. Oedipus hunted a truth until it hunted him. His children argued dignity until both lay in identical dirt. A girl measured love by a handful of dust and paid the bill all the way down. Dionysus, Cadmus's grandson, would one day bring his rights to Thebes and avenge his mother, shattering the city's certainty with drums and wine. In that story, Pentheus is torn by women, and Agave wakes with her son's blood on her wrist and bewilderment where joy had been. Thebes never learns to breathe like other cities. It is a laboratory where the gods prove theorems about fate and human attempts to edit it. Some experiments end with statues and temples. The Theban ones end with judgment scenes carved into theater, and yet a harder kindness threads the ruin. Antigone persists in every century, a name for the refusal to let law reduce a person to an example. Tiresias returns in play after play to say the thing nobody wants to hear. Oedipus stops being a king and becomes something braver, a man who refuses to turn away from what he has done. Even Creon, in some versions, is left alive to learn that correctness without mercy is only another kind of blindness. Thebes teaches that fate is not merely a hammer. Sometimes it is a mirror, and sometimes, when a girl bends in a dry field with a handful of dust, it is a door that a single person, small and stubborn, can hold open long enough for honor to walk through. The road from Thebes bends toward the sea, and at the edge of the Aegean, a different Astore learns what a single choice can cost the world. Family tragedies widen into a quarrel of nations, and it begins not with spears, but with an apple, bright, petty, irresistible. Eris, goddess of discord, was not invited to the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, the mortal and the sea nymph whose son would one day stamp his name on history. She came anyway, and into the feast she threw a golden fruit inscribed to the fairest. Hera reached, Athena reached, Aphrodite smiled and reached. When the gods argue, they sometimes choose a mortal to wear the bruise. Hermes led them to a shepherd on Mount Ida, a prince in exile named Paris, whose life had already been bent by omen. Each goddess offered him a future: Hera, kingship over men; Athena, victory and the clear intelligence to arrange it; Aphrodite, the love of the most beautiful woman alive. Paris chose the promise that sets a strong houses on fire. He chose Helen. Helen of Sparta had been courted by half the princes of Greece. To keep their rivalry from erupting into war, her mortal father Tyndareus made them swear a binding oath, whomever she chose. All the rest would defend that marriage with their swords. She chose Menelaus, brother to Agamemnon of Mycenae, and for a few years the world behaved. Then Paris came to Sparta under the protection of guest right and sailed away with Helen, stolen, persuaded, enchanted. Pick your poet and choose your version. Either way, the oaths woke up. Menelaus sent word, and the old suitors answered, because pride and promise are stubborn twins. They gathered like weather. Nestor of sandy Pylos brought counsel and horses. Ajax the Greater came like a tower, Ajax the Lesser like a knife. Idomeneus of Crete, Diomedes of Argos, the Dioscuri in some tellings, the shrewd king of Ithaca in all, Odysseus, who tried at first to feign madness, plowing a field with salt and 1,000-yard stare, until the embassy set his infant son in the furrow and watched the plow veer. One hero remained to be fetched from secrecy. Achilles, son of Theseus, swiftest of men, had been hidden by his mother among the daughters of Lycomedes, a bright garment among brighter garments. Odysseus came with bracelets and a spear, while the girls reached for glitter. One hand reached for iron. Metal knows its owner. The ruse ended. Destiny nodded. At Aulis, the fleet became a city of canvas and impatience. But the winds would not come. Calchas, the seer, said Artemis had been angered by a boast, a stag, a careless arrow, and demanded a price no father should be asked to pay. Iphigenia, daughter of Agamemnon, was summoned with promises of a wedding to Achilles and led instead to an altar. Some say the goddess whisked her away and left a deer in her place. Most say the blade fell, and a silence that never entirely ends fell with it. Sailcloth tightened. Oars bit water. The long war began to move. Troy watched the horizon harden into masts. Its walls were old and proud, said to have been raised by Poseidon and Apollo. When gods worked for wages, they were never paid. Priam ruled with a steady grief. Hecuba kept a house with too many sons for peace. Hector stood where good men always stand, between his city and what wants to break it. And Paris moved through corridors as if beauty were a law. Allies came from east and south, Sarpedon of Lycia, Memnon of Ethiopia, others whose names ride the wind of later song. The Greeks beached their ships and built a palisade of timbers and resolve. The years began to tick. There were 10 of them, raids to feed the camp, fields burned to starve the city, statues hauled like trophies, girls taken and renamed. Homer begins not with the first arrow, but when impatience grows teeth. In one of those raids, the Greeks seized Chryseis, daughter of a priest of Apollo. Her father came with ransom and sacred words. Agamemnon mocked him. Apollo answered with a plague that walked from tent to tent, counting down a stubborn. The prophet Calchas named the cure, return the girl. Agamemnon obeyed and then made a second wrong turn. To heal his pride, he took Briseis from Achilles, the captive who had become a living oath in the hero's tent. Achilles stood in the council with the anger of a man who knows exactly what he is worth and exactly how little his chief respects it. Words flew that do not unsay themselves. He swore off the war. He withdrew to his hut. The Myrmidons grounded their spears and stared at nothing. Without him, the Greek line bent and then slid backward, day by day toward the water that had brought it there. Hera and Athena tried to hold the coalition together. Zeus sat on Ida and weighed disaster in his hand. On Troy's walls, Andromache clutched her child and measured how wide a city is when a husband is not at home. The Iliad teaches patience by showing days in slices. A spear shaft snaps, a horse refuses the bit. Someone remembers home at the wrong time, a god tips the scale with a fingertip. A man dies with a sentence unfinished. Champions meet and trade armor like ghosts exchanging shirts. In the press of men, Sarpedon falls, a son of Zeus, dying because even the king of heaven must honor patterns he did not write. The Trojans surge to the Greek trench. Torches lick the beached ships. Smoke begins the alphabet of catastrophe. And then, finally, the name around which the poem is a whirlpool returns to its center. Patroclus, beloved friend, beloved more than friend, could not watch whole fleets become funeral pyres. He begged Achilles to let him fight in borrowed brilliance. Achilles agreed, but set a boundary: save the ships, break the Trojans, come back. Do not chase glory beneath Troy's high walls. The Myrmidons poured into battle, wearing their absent captain's legend. It worked, as all brave mistakes do. At first, fire died on the hulls. The Trojans staggered. Patroclus drove them farther, killed Sarpedon, and forgot the limit that love had set. At the gate, Apollo took him from behind. Euphorbus opened him. Hector finished what fate had already written. Achilles' armor rang on a body not his own. Grief becomes a weapon when the world is made of song. Thetis heard her son's cry from under the sea and rose because the mother hears what the ocean cannot swallow. She told him the truth again. If you return to war, you will not return home. He nodded as if she had described the weather. Hephaestus forged him new armor, most of all a shield crowded with the world. Cities at peace and cities at siege, harvests and dances, stars walking their measured paths. The poem puts a whole living order on the arm of a killer, so he cannot quite forget what his fury will unmake. Achilles went out. The ground learned his name again. What followed was not war, it was a harvest. Rivers ran red until they learned to be matter-of-fact about it. Lycaon, whom Achilles had once spared, reached for his knees. Pity did not answer. Scamander, the river god, rose to drown the man who was turning him into a soup. Hephaestus' fire hissed and made the steam of a deity. Achilles chased Hector 3 times around the walls while old Priam and young Andromache reached from the tower and begged the man they loved to go inside. Athena, masked as Deiphobos, promised help that never existed. Hector stood his ground anyway. He died as bravely as a man can die when luck and God have left him. Achilles pierced him, spoke to him like a judge, and refused the surrender of the body. The rage did not stop at the skin. Achilles tied Hector to his chariot and dragged him through dust because fury does not know future tense. He circled the tomb of Patroclus again and again, a man orbiting his own wound. The gods can swallow many things, but not this. At night, Hermes guided old Priam through the dark, right into the tent of the man who had unsowned him. The king knelt and kissed the hands that killed his child. He named his loss, and by naming it, named Achilles, Peleus. Gray, and waiting for a son who would not return. Something unclenched. Achilles wept with him. He lifted the old man up, called a servant, brought water and food, and gave the body back. He ordered 12 days of truce so Troy could remember how to bury. The poem ends on a funeral, not a victory. It does not tell you how Achilles dies, an arrow in the heel, Apollo's guidance, Paris's second-hand courage. It does not roll a wooden horse to the gate or set the city blazing. Those are other singers' work. Homer's concern is simpler and deeper. What anger does, what pride costs, and the moment when pity walks into a tent that yesterday smelled only of slaughter. When the pyre burns and the urn is sealed, the smoke carries a truth that stings like salt. Wars begin with apples and end with ashes, and in between them stand men who are mortal enough to grieve and, sometimes, just for a breath, merciful enough to listen. The smoke rising from Hector's pyre had not thinned before Cunning put on a carpenter's apron. After 9 years of siege, the Greeks learned what walls are for, not to be broken by force, but by patience and a lie. One morning, the Trojans climbed their towers and found the plain empty of ships. In their place stood a gift, timbers planed to its sleek monstrosity, a horse tall as a gate and hollow as a promise, a Greek named Sinon, left behind like an afterthought, spun a story tuned to hope. The horse, he swore, was a peace offering to Athena. To harm it would bring down her wrath, but to draw it inside would secure Troy's future. Laocoon, priest and pessimist, hurled a spear that thudded into the flank, and the wood answered with a muffled ring. He shouted the line that should have saved a city, "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts." Then, as if the sea itself had chosen sides, 2 serpents rose from the surf, coiled around Laocoon and his sons, and crushed prayer into silence. The crowd read omen where they should have read danger. Ropes were hauled, wheels squealed, cheers swelled, the horse rolled past the Scaean gate, the city feasted, the horse waited, night unstitched the day, a hidden trapdoor opened and men slid out. Odysseus, Menelaus, Diomedes, Neoptolemus, and others chosen for silence and deeds they would never wash clean. Signal fires bloomed along the shore. The Greek fleet, only hiding, rowed back under a starless discipline. What followed was not battle so much as inventory. Altars desecrated, doors smashed, throats cut, eyes averted. Priam was butchered at Zeus's altar by Achilles' half-grown son, Neoptolemus, a boy taught by war how to be too quick. In Athena's temple, Ajax the Lesser dragged Cassandra from the god's lap, an act that would cost his life later in salt and thunder. Andromache watched her boy Astyanax pried from her arms and hurled from the walls, so no seed of Hector could sprout revenge. The city lit like a sentence ending in flame. Only a few escaped the punctuation. Aeneas lifted his father Anchises onto his back, took his son by the hand, and walked out with household gods wrapped in cloth. The West waited for him with a long patience. Victory did not follow the victors home. The sea is a judge with a long docket. Ajax the Lesser, cocky from sacrilege, was struck down in a storm by Athena's borrowed anger. A rock saved him. Then Poseidon split the rock. Menelaus and Helen wandered to Egypt in some tellings. where a wiser priest made them wait until anger had a chance to cool. In another version, Helen had been a phantom in Troy all along, the real woman living in Egyptian shade, and you can choose the story that ruins your sleep less. Diomedes returned to Argos and found suspicion sitting in his chair. Exile polished his reputation into coins for foreign cities. Neoptolemus, hot with inherited confidence, died in Apollo's house at Delphi, a sacrifice wrapped as a quarrel. Agamemnon sailed first, and worst, he stepped into a bath in Mycenae and into a net. Clytemnestra, who had counted the years since Aulis on a string of grief beads, raised an axe. Cassandra, the seer no one heard, died with him, speaking the last truth that mattered only to history, that this death was a continuation, not an event. Justice, if that is the word for such cycles, overcorrected. Orestes returned from exile and killed his mother at Apollo's urging, then fled through a darkness that had a name, the Furies, old as blood, who punished the breaking of kin. His trial in Athens would one day become the theater where law learned to speak above vendetta. For now the islands heard his feet, and Odysseus, he learned what all long wars eventually teach their cleverest survivors, that peace is a voyage. He left Troy with 12 ships and a mind like a net, and lost both, one knot at a time. The Cicones taught him that victory has a second act. The Lotus Eaters offered forgetfulness and proved that paradise is only ever a pause. In a cave on a bright island, he taught a Cyclops named Polyphemus the trick of naming yourself nobody, then taught himself the cost of bragging as he shouted his real name back over the water and gave Poseidon a reason to take an interest in weather. Aeolus bound the winds in a bag and gave Odysseus a straight road home. His crew, small men with ordinary curiosity, untied it with insight of Ithaca, and the storm unwrote a near miracle. The Laestrygonians smashed ships like crockery until only one hull held one captain's future. Circe welcomed men and turned them into swine, which is a metaphor too sharp to dull. Odysseus, with Hermes' antidote and his own nerve, dined with her and learned that a year can pass like an arpeggio when a god is patient with you. In the underworld, he poured blood for the dead and called up Tiresias, who told him the rule that governs both seas and souls. Self-control or ruin, choose. He spoke with his mother, who had died of longing, and Achilles, who famously revised his opinion of fame, better to be a living nobody than a dead king. Sailors with wax in their ears pulled past the sirens, whose song is every story about yourself you wish were true. The ship split the strait between Scylla and Charybdis, losing 6 men to the rock monster rather than everyone to the whirlpool. A captain's math. On the sun god's island, famine and bad decisions undid warnings. The crew slaughtered the sacred cattle, and Helios' complaint ripened into a bolt. The last raft found Calypso's shore, where 7 years slid by on a goddess's island like oil on a quiet sea. When Hermes came with orders from Zeus, Odysseus built a new boat out of goodbye and memory, weathered one last tantrum from Poseidon, and washed up on the sands of Scheria, where the Phaeacians, a people as hospitable as a story's last chapter, fed him, listened, and carried him home while he slept, home demand its own kind of courage. In Ithaca, Time had turned his house into a hive of insolent men, eating his livestock and courting his wife. Penelope had invented a loom to hold back the world. She wove a shroud by day and unmade it by night. Odysseus came ashore disguised as what the years had nearly made him, an old beggar, and tested the floors of his own house like a thief would test a window. He found loyalty in a swineherd, tears in a dog that died after one wag, prudence in a son who had grown up in rumor. Then he chose a day. The bow that only he could string drew into the past and let fly an arrow that moved into the future. The hall, full of men who had mistaken absence for permission, became a sentence assembled out of spearheads and memory. Athena steadied his arm, but did not spare him the work. When it was done, he scrubbed the blood from his floor and from the story. He told Penelope a tale only a husband could know about a bed rooted into the earth, and her caution, which is the noblest part of love, finally yielded to recognition. The suitor's kin reached for their knives. Athena stepped down and said the single most merciful word in the Greek vocabulary. Enough. Peace is not won, but declared, and then maintained with difficulty. What do we make of what remains? The wooden horse smolders in imagination longer than it burned in the city. The returns, nostoi, teach that victory has a cost ledger thicker than any Iliad. Agamemnon's bath, Menelaus's detour, Diomedes' exile, Neoptolemus' altar, Ajax's rock, Orestes' verdict, Odysseus' slow arithmetic of survival. These are not loose threads, but the fabric turned over to show its stitches. The gods who arrange the opening, Hera with her jealous sums, Athena with her civic arithmetic, Aphrodite with a smile sharp enough to open an artery, Poseidon with weather. Do not exit the stage, they grow quieter. Let mortals carry more of the noise, and mortals do, badly and bravely. Somewhere far west, Aeneas carries fire in a bowl and a story in his mouth, and one day Rome will claim his patience as pedigree. In Greece, temples rise to thank powers who rarely asked for thanks, while poets put order to sorrow and teach cities how to talk about what cannot be fixed. If you strip away the helmets and the bronze, the gods' bed tricks and the monsters' appetites, you find something precise, a civilization instructing itself in public, how to lose, how to come home, how to forgive, how to remember. We end where all good Greek tales end, not with certainty, but with endurance. Troy burns. Men return or do not. A queen lifts an axe. A son lifts a knife. A wife keeps a secret loom moving until the door opens. A captain lies, then tells the truth, then lies again, because truth without a strategy gets men killed. The gods, whose tempers were once weather, clear their throats less often. The world grows into the size of its people. And yet at night, when ships moan at their ropes and the hearth crackles like a small prophecy, you can still hear a voice from a high wall, pleading for a husband to come inside, and another voice from a black tent, asking one more time for the dead to be returned. Apples begin wars, ashes end them. Between them, men and women try to live in a way that lets the next generation inherit something larger than grief.